shelf already?
I'm clogged in. I'm set up in the corner of my bedroom because I live in a tiny little apartment right now. So that's why I got the green screen to hide.
I need to get
bed.
a green screen for my Twitch channel where I read stories to people. I want to do that now. You've convinced me. I think it's a good idea.
I really tried hard. I said, "Hey, you should read stories on Twitch." Oh, well,
That's a great idea.
man.
But you need to follow your wife's advice and do it shirtless.
Yes, shirtless. I have to get a six pack first, so maybe
I'm gonna start like being a boob streamer because I got man boobs, you know.
You made my headphones fall off.
You've got meatloaf moves from Fight Club.
Fat guy thought.
Dude, there's probably a lot of people out there that would watch that. I'm not even gonna lie.
I'm gonna be shirtless, man boobs, and a Viking beard.
I'll take a look.
I'm doing it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Salty Nerd Podcast. I'm your host, the Salty Nerd, and today's episode we're going to be discussing the pinnacle of all nerd geekdom, the Star Wars original trilogy. That's right, everybody. On George Lucas's birthday, we're going to be talking about the OG, the Tridge.
Wow.
Yikes.
Trying way too hard there.
And I am joined.
Just trying some new things. Just go with
I'm
it.
joined by my illustrious co-hosts, Matthew Kadish, author extraordinaire. Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Doing good. Ready to talk about some Star Wars.
Hell yeah. For the month of May. George Lucas's birthday, which we totally planned. We're going to tell everybody that we totally planned.
Yeah, we're
that.
recording this on George Lucas's birthday.
Indeed.
Celebrating his pinnacle achievement.
We had cake.
Fudge.
And chips.
Peanut butter fudge.
And alcohol.
I'm also, we always have alcohol. I'm also joined by Jude. Welcome, Jude, to the show.
Hi.
Welcome to Star Wars Month for
Thank
the
you.
first time. You were like,
Thank
I don't want to
you.
do anything except for the original trilogy.
Stop telling people that I hate Star Wars. I'm not a hater.
She just loves
I'm a
the
purist.
best. She loves the best Star Wars. I
That's
like
right.
that. Purists. Cheers to that.
My cup never runs empty.
To George.
To George. Tap.
I'm just drinking water.
I'm also joined by the Dark Lord himself, Matt Vader, 74. What's up, buddy?
My tooth hurts.
Have you gone to the dentist
No,
yet?
tomorrow.
Did Jude get the Coke I asked for? No Coke?
No, I gave him essential oils.
Oh, perfect.
He says it wasn't the same.
I've been burping it up.
And
Perfect.
then he accused me of being a witch doctor.
So
You are a witch doctor.
Well, you're welcome.
Before we get started, I just wanted to let everybody know that if you love this podcast, you can go to saltynerdvideo.com and you can check out our YouTube video. You can like and subscribe all the videos that you see there because they're all awesome. And we have a ton of new content hitting your YouTube feed daily. So go to saltynerdvideo.com or just saltynerd.com. And you can check out all the stuff that we have available on whatever platform you prefer. That being said, let's get straight into it. Star Wars. George Lucas's birthday, the original trilogy, the trilogy that changed everything for everybody. And I mean everybody. What is your experience, Matthew Kadish, with the original trilogy? Tell me how it has changed your life.
It was the driving factor for me wanting to become a filmmaker and working in Hollywood. So there's that.
Pretty big.
Yeah. But it's funny because when I was very young, my dad was stationed in Germany. And so, when I was out there, my only exposure to Star Wars was because it came out the year before I was born in theaters. So a friend of ours sent like a bunch of VHS tapes with like American programming to us when we were in Germany. So they recorded a lot of cartoons and kid-friendly stuff for me and my brothers to watch while we were stationed out there. And they sent us a bootleg copy of A New Hope. And for the longest time, I thought that was the only Star Wars movie. And it was one of the only English language movies we had. So I must have watched that thing like 100 times growing up while we were over in Germany. And then when we got back to the States, I found out there were two more. I was like, no way. And I saw Empire, and that blew my mind. And Jedi Return of the Jedi, even though it's not as good as the other three, it was still like, it was the climax. It was the end of the saga. And just growing up, like I'd consume every piece of Star Wars content I could. I read all the books. I collect the comic books and watch the cartoon shows and all that good stuff. And
did you watch the Christmas special?
I did not watch the Christmas special. But it wasn't because I didn't want to watch the Christmas special. It's just I never knew when it was on. And I think they only aired it once. So, and I was a kid, so I couldn't like seek it out.
We can watch it tonight if you want to.
It's okay. As I matured into a older geek, I guess you could say, I began researching the story behind the making of the original Star Wars and what went into the special effects. And it's very rare to find like a movie that actually changes the way movies are made. And that was something that Star Wars did. And it was so influential, not just on me, but on so many different people and on an entire industry. And it's something that, you watch these movies today and they still hold up.
Oh, yeah.
They still hold up. Like you can watch something like The Black Hole, like we've talked about on the show before, and it doesn't hold up.
No, it's very 70s.
Yeah. But these movies, like, you're watching them, you're just like, even though they got like the 70s haircuts and all that stuff, there's something about these movies that are just timeless, and they're so well made that I think they still inspire people to this day when they finally get around to seeing them.
At least I hope so. I never thought about anything in the original Star Wars that you could tell that it was made in the 70s. I don't see 70s haircuts or 70s fashion or anything like that in those movies at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons they do hold up as well as they do, So
I mean, there are some like mustaches.
Yeah, mustaches
and mop tops.
And feather hair and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But overall, you are right. They did a really great job of making it like an alien universe, an alien world that doesn't really mesh with ours. It's so distant and just great adventure. But
it is funny, like when we rewatched Rogue One, they recreated all like the hairstyles and the facial hair and all that stuff. And it felt like Star Wars, because Star Wars just had that kind of like early 80s, late 70s sensibility to it. But they did a really good job of kind of divorcing it from its time and making it stand on its own.
Yeah. Jude, what's your what's your experience with the original trilogy? Why specifically? I want to know why you didn't really care to be too involved in the other two episodes about Star Wars, but this one you were like, no, I want to talk about the original trilogy. So what is it about the original trilogy that sets it apart from everything else?
I think one of the reasons why it is so timeless, why it still holds up, is that because first and foremost, it's a supernatural show. It's a fantasy show. So it takes the time out of it. It's in some galaxy, not here, sometime, not now. And it kind of relieves you of having to place it somewhere. So it is timeless and it does still hold up. I didn't have the experience with this that was so earth-shattering that I think the rest of you did, but it's not something that blows my mind, but it is something that to me still holds up and is still quality. And the prequels just don't for me, and I find them laughable and uncharming.
Damn.
They are. The storytelling is not as puzzling or interesting. It doesn't keep my attention. It's just, it's kind of like a loose puzzle piece that you found a bunch of them laying in a corner of a room and you went, oh, here they are. Let me just shove those in that puzzle real quick. And now you have a full story. But it doesn't endear me to the story at all. It's these three movies I think are kind of, it's set apart from the rest of it. And I think that the prequels, it didn't add to it for me. And it was just sort of, I think people get so bananas about Star Wars in general that they'll just eat up anything put in front of them. And that's not a dig on any of you. But for me, I don't know. It's just not, the prequels are just not something that they're not good. Sorry, I was trying to dance around it, but yeah, no, they're
Don't
not.
sugarcoat it. This
They're
is not the
not good.
sugar-coated salty.
They're not good. The storytelling is not good. The writing is not good.
So when did you see the original
not believable.
trilogy? When did you get hooked on those?
Okay, so the first one came out in 1977, and I know that I saw it. I don't remember when I saw it because I was a baby when this came out. So I know that when I saw it was probably when I was a child and it was playing on TV. So probably several years after it came out. I do remember when Return of the Jedi.
It was 83, right, guys?
Yeah, I think so. I do remember when that one came out because I was a kid then.
Yeah.
And I remember that everybody had the stuffed Ewoks, and that's what we got for Christmas, and it was all the rage. And
Our generation's Baby Yoda.
yeah,
Exactly.
Ewoks and Mogwais. So I have memory of that one, and that holds more of an emotional place for me. It's my favorite of the three.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. On.
Just because of it takes me back to a particular place in my childhood. It's endearing to me.
Right on. Cool. Matt Vader, what's your original experience with the OT?
I was 7, and I remember my mom and dad put me and my little brother in the car, and they took us to the drive-in.
Oh, nice.
And we're all like, where are we going? Oh, we're going to go watch this stupid Star Wars movie. It's like, oh, okay, Dad, whatever, And the worst mistake he ever made. It was literally from the second the ship flew across the screen at the beginning after the crawl to the end of that movie, I was completely enthralled.
That's amazing.
And kind of just turned me into a Star Wars nerd forever from that moment on.
That's all it took.
That's all it took.
What about that space? Is because you just never seen anything like that before?
No, nobody had ever seen anything like that before. And I was 7. You remember last week we talked about how, or 2 weeks ago, you said the prequels were your generation, right?
Yeah.
Well, the original was for me. I was 7, 10, and 13 when those movies came out.
Nice.
Yeah, the pinnacle of special effects up to that point had been 2001.
Yeah.
A Space Odyssey.
Yeah. Stanley Kubrick.
And if you look at the special effects in that, compare it to Star Wars, it's not even a comparison.
Yeah, I remember
That was released in 68.
Hold on, this is Matt's.
I remember from the very beginning when the stormtroopers blew open the door on the ship and out stepped Vader, and I was like, holy God.
Love at first sight.
Who is this guy? Yeah, it was. It was like, most kids wanted to be Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. Nope. Not me.
I want to be that.
Never have I wanted to be anybody else in that movie.
And he didn't even do
Darth
anything.
Vader.
He just stepped in the door.
And and he was a badass.
One of the best intros to a character in cinema. Like, talk about entrances.
Just walks in and
like
owns
all
the
these
place.
all these people running scared to death. Here's this big guy in his black cape and his helmet, deep voice.
Yeah.
You're like, who is this guy? This guy is awesome. Yeah. And basically I found out later that I'm basically rooting for Space Hitler. But whatever.
That explains so much.
Whatever.
That's awesome, man. That's a good experience. That makes me happy just hearing something like that because I wasn't there. Like for me, I'm the generation, like you said, Kadish, that I kind of grew up on the prequels. However, I was already a super Star Wars nerd by that time. I don't remember. I don't have a single memory of a time where I didn't know what Star Wars was. Star Wars has just been part of my vocabulary since the very beginning. And I remember when I was young, very, very young, watching, I was on TV. We still had like a little, remember the TVs that were like, looked like a shelf, like a drawer shelf. They had drawers on both sides. And there's
Console
just
TV?
A console TV. It's just stuck in the middle of this giant drawer with a little like 4-channel dial. Like that's what I watched Star Wars on. My family was poor.
That's just what they were back then.
Yeah, that's what they were. I mean, had to have been, no, because it was the 90s. My family was just poor. I just remember watching those movies, and I remember like trying to do front flips off my couch, just like Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi when he jumps off the little floating thing over the Sarlacc pit. He jumps up and does a flip and lands and grabs his lightsaber. Like I used to jump off my couch and do flips onto the cushions and and I'd have my little toy stick. We didn't have lightsabers. My parents didn't have enough money to buy me like a toy lightsaber or anything. I just had a broomstick with a little bit of duct tape on the bottom for the hilt, and I used to pretend with that.
You were the kid from The Last Jedi.
Oh, shut up, dude! Don't ever say that to me again.
You were Broom Boy. Yeah.
Broom boy. You guys suck so much. Why you gotta dump salt on my memories?
You're Broom Boy. You suck.
You just ruined his childhood.
Did Ryan Johnson's kid?
Yeah, I Johnson. Yeah, Johnson.
You dickbags. No, but I don't remember there ever being a time. And then what I do remember about going to the theaters is when the special editions came out, and I was too young to know. Like nowadays, I kind of prefer the original theatrical releases. I feel like they're more pure.
Oh yeah. With
Definitely
special
prefer those.
editions, really. What the?
Well, it's funny because when they were re-released, that was the first time I actually got to see any of them in the theater because my experience with them up to that point had always been on VHS. And when they came out with the special editions, it's funny because when we were rewatching them in preparation for this podcast, I'm sitting there, I'm just like, there's so much wrong with the special editions. It's like the originals were just perfect.
Yeah.
Even in their imperfections, they were just so like pure. And George Lucas going back and tinkering with them actually detracts
A little bit it does.
Yeah.
There's only a handful that I would say actually add to the experience, and there's not many. Most of them are in Empire Strikes Back, but
the worst.
Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
100%. That singing, they changed the song.
No. It's where Anakin shows up at the end, and instead,
So
Hayden
cheesy.
Christensen.
instead of looking like he did when he died,
Yeah.
Darth Vader is now Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, that was a weird transition.
Yeah.
Well, he de-aged himself in the afterworld.
But nobody else did.
Yeah, no one else.
We
followed.
don't you just wait
It's
until we get
terrible.
Ewan McGregor as
Yep.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yep.
Wait until that happens. Goodbye.
Yeah,
God, I can't remember.
but the whole Jabba music video palace scene,
The
was
musical
awful.
number, terrible.
awful.
Yeah. Is it just me, or did Jabba triple in size from the first time we saw him?
In A New Hope, he
Yeah.
was like just a normal
Yeah,
slug.
he's the same size as Han Solo.
But it's been like 4 years,
To be
5 years?
fair, he wasn't in the original movie.
Yeah, exactly. He was a guy. It was
He
a
was
guy
just
in
some
a
guy.
in a fur coat.
Well, I remember George
But
Lucas
that scene wasn't in the movie.
Yeah,
I know.
I remember George Lucas talking about it and him saying that, Jabba got fat between episode 4 and episode 6.
Did he also
perfect.
get taller?
Yes,
I felt like that the special edition, that version where Han goes and talks to Jabba, like it's kind of cool for like a nerd standpoint where you get to kind of see.
should never
like,
have been included.
It should never have been. I know, but
You didn't
like
need it in that
like
movie.
Boba Fett was there, which was really cool because they had that concept for Boba Fett before The Empire Strikes Back, which I thought was kind of cool. But other than that, it was like totally useless, and you didn't have to have it. And I think it actually detracted from the reveal. Like we hear about Jabba the Hutt, right? Han's like, man, I
Yeah.
got a debt to pay against Jabba the Hutt. For 2 movies,
Yeah.
we hear about this dude. We finally get to see him in Return of the Jedi, and he's like this giant slug. You're
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah.
No way. Like we don't, like the younger generation don't get that anymore because we already know what he looks like. So it kind of sucks in that manner. But like I was saying, like I went to go to the theaters, and I was too young to really care at this point of what was added and what wasn't. I just saw Star Wars on the big screen finally. I remember sitting in line at the theater with my dad, like holding my dad's hand and like just looking up at everybody standing around me, waiting to go and watch this movie. And it's a wonderful experience, man. Those movies are just so perfect to me. I can't have any complaints against the theatrical versions, even the original, even the special editions. Like I feel like a lot of that, most of it is good. There's a lot of bad to it. Like
Yeah.
a couple of the Mos Eisley scenes with the dinosaur stuff, like, nah, I'm not into that. But the extra scenes with the X-Wings, like that's solid stuff. Where they have like a couple of extra scenes where the TIE fighters and X-Wings are doing some dogfighting and stuff. I'm like, that was some good additions. And then Empire Strikes Back, we got a little bit of an addition with the Wampa on Hoth, which I felt was a good addition. Oh yeah, and A New Hope, like the Mos Eisley scenes felt like we're over the top. And I verified. You said there were no other speeders in the theatrical version. That is false, sir. There were speeders.
when did I say that?
A while back, like 5 or 6 podcasts ago, you were arguing with me over what was in the original theatrical version versus what was in the special edition,
That was how he felt at the time.
and you were incorrect.
I don't recall this conversation.
That's good because you
don't
were
either.
wrong. It's funny. It's funny how that works.
I think you're making arguments up.
Whose side are you on?
I don't know.
Let's go to the tapes, or it didn't happen.
Maybe our followers can tell us. Anyway, so what was I talking about? Oh yeah, there's just just being in the theater for the first time as a kid and watching the original trilogy. It's just incredible. Like I didn't care if it was the special editions or not. I was just like, this is amazing. Yeah. Get to see Luke Skywalker on the big screen, and I think that had a definitive effect on where I took my life. Although I didn't pursue a career involved in that, but the creative side of my brain has always been in Star Wars, in Jurassic Park and movies like that kind of influenced me. And then now we're here where I'm like, I was old enough to buy some equipment and start a podcast. And I want to talk about movies because I love them. And my love of movies 100% goes back to Star Wars because that is literally the first movies I remember watching as a kid.
It started the whole blockbuster trend of the 80s.
And the first actually good sequel too, I believe, right? It was Empire Strikes Back.
Well, there was Godfather too.
Oh, okay.
The best thing about
I'll accept.
the best thing about being 7 years old when this movie came out was the toys.
Oh yeah. Tell us about that. What's the experience with those old Kenner toys?
I don't remember when I got my first toy. It was soon after the movie came out.
Did you get the voucher?
I do remember getting the voucher, but I don't think I ever cashed it in.
So, do you guys know the history of the voucher?
Oh yeah,
it's from the Empire Dreams documentary. So what happened was that Kenner didn't have the money to make the toys until after they had already sold them, because Lucas couldn't afford to pay Kenner up front. So they were like, well, we'll pass out these vouchers. People will pay full price for these little cardboard cutouts. And then after we get the money, we'll use that money to make the toys and then send it to everybody who has a voucher.
All I know now at this point is if I had kept those toys,
Muko,
I could probably retire because I had a lot of those toys.
Did you have them all?
Oh, yeah. I had a ton of that stuff.
Well, the really interesting aspect to the whole toy thing was that, Lucas was the first filmmaker to actually merchandise his stuff. And before Star Wars came along, movie studios, they didn't, do these licensing deals. So when Lucas said he wanted to retain the merchandising rights to Star Wars, Fox was like, "Oh yeah, go ahead, we don't care," and that's where he made his fortune. It wasn't off the movies; it was off the merchandise, based off the movies. And actually, we'll talk about this when we get to Empire. But because Empire went over budget, he actually had to give up a couple points on his merchandising rights back to Fox in order to finish the film. And that's one of the reasons why he fired Gary Kurtz for the third movie. So the merchandising actually has like a big part to play in the saga of Star Wars.
Oh, and that changed the business industry.
It's all documented pretty good in that Toys That Made Us show, right?
Yeah. There's a show that does that, and I like I actually like the part about how they before Lucas came along and kind of created this new industry of the toy making process. Like there was some like funny knockoff Star Trek toys from the '60s where they didn't have the license to make it, so they just made it like the cheapo version. There's like cheap phasers and cheap, discount Captain Kirks and stuff. I always thought that was pretty funny. And then Lucas came in and just completely changed the game.
But growing up, I had a huge collection of Star Wars toys. In fact, I was telling Jude when we were watching Return of the Jedi, I had the Tauntaun toy that had like the hollow belly that you could shove your Luke into. That's amazing. And what was your response?
Yeah.
Yeah. She was just like, ew.
What's the internal temperature of a Tauntaun, Jude? Lukewarm.
No, I remember playing with my Darth Vader and my Luke, and they had those stupid little expendable plastic things, and he had that plastic cape. Worth a fortune. I'm getting sick to my stomach because
they're
they're long gone.
I had the original Millennium Falcon toy set and the TIE fighter where the wings blow off and stuff like that. It was great.
All my toys were post like 90s, almost just barely before the prequels came out, and I had Return of the Jedi Luke in his black outfit with his green lightsaber. That was my favorite one, I think. I used to play with that thing all the time, but I had all the newer like action figures, the ones that actually had knees that bent and arms that bent and stuff like that. And I could actually
the crappier action.
When we
were better. Are you kidding me?
when we were allowed to go out in public,
was poor. Leave him alone.
Yeah, very poor. I love you, Mom and Dad.
When we were allowed to go out in public, I'd drive down to Fremont Street once in a while, at least 2 or 3 times a year, just to go into that Rogue Toy store. Is it Rogue Toys or Toy? I forget what it's called, but it's on Fremont Street there.
Yeah,
And he's got all the old stuff, a whole wall of them, and they're all still on
There's
card.
this big tourist trap of a toy store.
It's amazing
down there, and they've got all the vintage toys, and it's
completely overpriced.
What's that
Yeah.
place called? We should get them as a sponsor.
Yeah, he's the guy that's on Pawn Stars. He's the toy expert.
Oh,
on
okay,
Pawn Stars.
okay.
I forget the name of the store now.
We'll find out later. Google it, people.
There's some cool stuff in there, man. It's kind of like going to songs. It's like going into a museum.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I remember
but it is very pricey.
Yeah,
like where I grew up back east, there's quite a few antique shops. It's kind of like a thing for the Northeast. You know, there's an antiquing thing. It's legitimate. Like people do that on the weekends. Like, hey, let's go antiquing together as a family. Like, I had to do that. But I do remember going into some antique stores and just like the old lunch boxes from the 70s and the old Kenner toys. And
I had a Star Wars lunchbox and a Star Wars backpack and all that stuff.
I still look for that stuff because I do plan on having a nerd shelf set up at least someday. I have a Vader shrine. It's in a box right now, but it's just these really weird, obscure Darth Vader toys or
those are the best
toothbrushes or Pez dispensers or whatever.
Pez dispensers.
Oh yeah, I remember those too.
Yeah. The Yoda
Plushies.
Pez dispensers.
Right on. So we all of our childhoods have been heavily impacted by
defined, I would say.
This movie franchise that George came up with. And I think the one thing I want to make sure that this message gets across, and I did it in my tweet today, is that George set out, his purpose to make these movies was to make these wholesome adventure movies for a younger generation, because during that particular time in history, Vietnam War, everything was kind of doom and gloom. There was a lot of negativity going around, kind of like it is today, which I feel like we need the new Star Wars right now. But he set out to give hope and an escape for a younger generation, and it worked. It was a lightning in a bottle. It worked so well that it's affecting people even 40 plus years later. So shout out to George Lucas. Cheers to him. Before we get super deep into these movies.
That was a thud. I got a plastic bottle.
All right, so let's talk about A New Hope, Star Wars, as it was called before they actually gave it a title and a number. Matthew Kadish, why don't you set the table for us on this movie? What is this movie about, and how freaking awesome is it?
It's pretty freaking awesome.
How perfect is it on a narrative standpoint?
Narrative standpoint, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably put it at a 7.5, possibly an 8.
You're such a hard sell.
Well, I mean, it has its issues. Don't get me wrong. But
nothing's perfect, Jude.
But Empire's pretty close. But
cheers to that.
What's interesting about A New Hope is that you kind of got to put it within the context of its time. When this movie was being made, storytelling was in the middle of a countercultural revolution. And there was this whole new generation of filmmakers that were kind of coming up through the ranks of Hollywood, because Hollywood was transitioning from a studio kind of system where movies were shot, indoors on sound stages, and they were all very clean and sterile and kind of had to obey certain rules. And this new generation, kind of led by Francis Ford Coppola, they were known as the countercultural generation, and they were making movies that were just breaking all the old Hollywood rules. And Lucas, he had just come off of American Graffiti, which was, it was a pretty standard movie in terms of the stuff that was coming out during that time. And he really pushed the envelope of what a movie could do. And in fact, he pushed it so much that pretty much everyone thought this movie was going to bomb. Like, he had a screening of a rough cut of the movie for, I believe it was Coppola, Spielberg, and John Milius, who was kind of an up-and-coming filmmaker at the time. And he didn't have any of the special effects done. He had kind of B-roll footage of World War II, dogfights spliced into the film. And
Bomber Brigade, is that the movie that he used?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And when the movie was over, both Milius and Coppola just let him have it. They're like, this movie's terrible. It's awful. You need to do this. You need to do that. And the only one who actually said George, I think this is pretty good, it was Spielberg. And when this movie came out, first of all, it was a technical marvel because no movie had ever done special effects quite like this movie had in the past. We talked about earlier that up to that point, the biggest science fiction film to be made was 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. And that had kind of like these special effects. They weren't like cutting edge, but they were the best they could do at the time. And, Lucas, he'd always been kind of like an experimental filmmaker. That was like his real bread and butter was, THX 1138 and the weird stuff like that.
It still is too, I think.
Yeah.
I have a feeling like he's got a backlog of weird movies that he hasn't released yet.
But the really fascinating thing about how he approached this movie is that in addition to it being like kind of like technically advanced in terms of the special effects and the filmmaking, was his approach to crafting the story. And he went through, I would argue that George Lucas is not a good writer.
We talked about this before.
But he's a good conceptualizer. And he was heavily influenced by this Kurosawa film called The Hidden Fortress. And his original drafts of Star Wars were actually like basically an Americanized version of this Akira Kurosawa film, which for those of you who don't know who Akira Kurosawa is, he was basically like the biggest filmmaker in Japan. He was kind of like their version of Hitchcock, or I guess modern day Spielberg or something like that. But he was this foreign filmmaker who had a huge impact on this countercultural generation of filmmakers. Because he was making most of his movies in the 50s, but he was doing stuff that was so outside of what Hollywood was doing that it was just mesmerizing to the people who would watch his movies. And so Spielberg was heavily influenced by this particular film of his called The Hidden Fortress, and his early drafts of the original Star Wars were very close to what that movie was. And then over time, he kind of began studying what was called the hero's journey, which is based off of Joseph A. Campbell's analysis of Greek mythology, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And from that book, Lucas kind of came up with this hero's journey structure, which is actually, it basically revolutionized how like big budget blockbuster science fantasy stuff is told, because it's the journey of, a mythical hero. And once he kind of got the structure down, he applied it to Star Wars, and he started making changes from what it was originally, which was a ripoff of this Hidden Fortress movie.
Yeah.
And it evolved into what it became. And the impact of this is just, it can't even be stated, because it basically changed the way Hollywood went about structuring its movies and, character arcs and things like that. It was very like revolutionary, I guess you could say. And people have studied Star Wars as like a textbook example of how you structure not only like a movie, but a particular type of movie like the hero's journey and a trilogy at large. Unfortunately, I don't think the people who made the sequels really studied it all that much. But if you look at A New Hope, beat for beat, it is structurally perfect. Like from a meta point of view, if you're looking at it from the 1,000-foot, viewpoint, this
you got
movie,
the call to action, the refusal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything that happens in this movie is just perfectly plotted out to the 100th degree. So, most film schools, especially like screenwriting schools or even just writing classes, look at New Hope as the textbook example of how to do a perfect 3-act structure hero's journey. And when I was rewatching it, I was just so struck at like how elegant it was. And, a lot of this was kind of like fixed in the editing room by George Lucas's wife, who kind of came in and cleaned up a lot of the mistakes that he made. But the genesis of it started with the script. And even though I don't think George Lucas is a very talented writer or director, he has like this instinctual kind of storytelling compass, I guess you could say, that guides him to the right direction.
Well, have you ever heard his comments? I can't remember when he gave an interview, but he talked about his thoughts on storytelling. And he basically said, like, I believe there's only like 33 or 32 different types of stories that can actually be told. And anything beyond that is just a variation of those stories.
Yeah, he was talking about, they say there's only 33 master plots out there.
Mm-hmm.
and everything is just like a variation on those. And I would say that 33 is a bit much. I think they're probably more like 12.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 12 master plots that you could fit pretty much every movie into. And some of them double up, like, so you can have a hero's journey, but you can also have something like a quest story or a chase story or something like that in addition to. All right, so getting back to this whole concept of the 33 master plots that George Lucas had, one of the things that's interesting about this is that you have to remember before the countercultural kind of rise of these filmmakers, all film people kind of went through an apprenticeship system where they worked on movies, they worked their way up, and eventually they became like directors and creatives and stuff like that. And George Lucas was part of the first generation of film school filmmakers, where they went to UCLA and USC and they studied the craft of filmmaking, but they also studied like film theory and storytelling and stuff like that. And so when it comes to the hero's journey structure that George kind of pioneered, it was an outgrowth of kind of like this generation of people who actually studied film as opposed to just tradesmen who worked their way up through it. And this can't be stressed enough, like the impact that film schools had on people like Spielberg and Lucas and Scorsese and stuff like that. And Star Wars: A New Hope is kind of an outgrowth of that study, because even though like George Lucas, he's a very competent technical craftsman. He's someone who, when it comes to technology, he gets very in the weeds with it. He understands it. And the same thing can be said of, writing, where he's competent enough in terms of like the theory behind the writing. It's just the actual execution of the writing that, he sometimes struggles with. And when it came to A New Hope, his kind of craftsmanship of the story's narrative is really the thing that kind of makes this movie work, in addition to the technical aspect of it. So, he told a very simple story. And it's like, when I was rewatching it, I was just floored, especially now that I think I was telling you guys earlier, like I haven't watched these movies in like a while now, even though I've watched them like 1,000 times. And like comparing them to the new stuff that we've gotten, like it just makes me appreciate like how well made they are.
Yeah. Jude, on your most recent rewatch, how did A New Hope make you feel, like when you were watching it again? Of course, you've seen it a million times, I'm sure, but
I haven't seen it that many times.
you haven't. Oh,
No, I'm not like you guys.
oh, okay. So rewatching it, like,
Now,
did
if it
you?
were Harry Potter, it'd be a different story.
Frick that pothead. So what are your thoughts on A New Hope? What is it about this movie that you find so much enjoyment out of?
I think there's just something so bewitching about this tridge that the newer movies just don't have. There's just something like captures you, and it's timeless, and the story sucks you in, and it's beguiling, and it's hard to find something that transcends time and still holds up, that just takes a hold of you.
Who do you connect with the most out of this movie? Do you connect with Princess Leia or Luke Skywalker? Or Han Solo? Or Chewbacca?
C-3PO.
C-3PO?
I love that man.
Tell me more.
That's my boy.
Tell me more. What is it about C-3PO that...
He's just always nervous.
Anthony Daniels?
I love him.
Oh, that's amazing. I did not expect you to say that.
C-3PO and R2-D2 are the best characters in the whole thing.
Really?
I love them.
Oh, it's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
They are what George Lucas set
That's
them
the
up.
love story that no one talks about.
George Lucas set those two up to be the ones who were basically telling the story in this.
Yeah, they're like Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, actually, like going back to the influence of Akira Kurosawa and The Hidden Fortress, that movie, Akira Kurosawa chose to tell the story through the point of view of the two lowest characters, who are these two peasants, one tall one short one.
Yeah.
And they're always bickering with one another.
Yeah.
And George Lucas specifically, based R2-D2 and C-3PO on these two characters. In fact, if you watch The Hidden Fortress, you'll see like, the scene where like C-3PO and R2-D2 are together on Tatooine and they split up. that's taken right from the Hidden Fortress, because there's a scene where that actually happens with those characters. But George was so fascinated with this concept of telling this big epic story through the point of view of the two lowest characters in the ensemble. And that's what he translated over to his version.
Do you guys think that was carried through in the other 3 movies that he did in the prequels? Do you think that idea of having the story told by R2 and C-3PO?
No, I feel like that was something that was very specific to the original trilogy. And I was going to talk about this when we got to Return of the Jedi, but like 3PO has a character arc that goes through all 3 movies, where he starts off by saying he's not a very good storyteller, and then by Jedi, he's regaling the Ewoks with like this fascinating story.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so like that's his character arc throughout the trilogy.
And it's such a full story from start to finish of these 2 droids, where they start and everything that they go through.
Wow. I actually don't think I've ever connected those dots before, but he does say that line. I'm not very good at telling stories, as he's getting out of the oil bath in A New Hope. And then he's sitting in front of the Ewoks, like explaining the whole
he's their
saga.
god at that point.
Oh my gosh, dude. I've never put those 2 things together. I don't know how I missed that. That's amazing.
That just goes to show the quality of the storytelling in the original trilogy, where structurally everything works. Everyone has a character arc. Everyone has some type of transformative arc. There's just so much that goes on within these 3 movies that it's just textbook perfect. Yeah. And part of that is just seeing how these characters evolve over the course of 3 movies. Like all the main characters evolve, even Darth Vader. Evolves over the course of these movies. And it's fascinating, like, rewatching them. It's fascinating to like look at it and deconstruct it and like figure it all out.
Yeah. And that's like what I was talking about when we were doing the Westworld review. And when I was saying about like, I trust this storytelling because I know that there's a reason for everything that they do. And that's how I feel about this original trilogy, and I don't feel like that with any of the other movies. They just do for the sake of doing it. And there's just characters for the sake of merchandising them. And I don't believe in it, and I don't trust in it. And it has no place in my heart. But with this, every single thing that they did was for a reason. And I just give myself over to the story of it and just let myself enjoy it and not pick it apart like I would something else.
You guys are all so deep.
Vader, what's your favorite
Kid
part
is
of the
taking
New
us
Hope?
to school over here.
I love that stuff, though.
What's my favorite part?
Yeah, what's your favorite part?
I like the lasers and the blasters and the space fights.
Matt, how great was that opening scene where they're, what was the name of the Corellian transport that Leia was on?
Tavern 5?
Tavern 5.
Something like that. Some nerd's going to yell at me for not.
People are going to like put me on the spot and I can't think of it.
Well, it's just like we're all of like Leia's troops are in that hallway.
Leia's Corvette.
Yeah, Leia's Corvette. They're in the hallway and, they're just waiting for the stormtroopers to break in. And that opening fight is just like I don't know, there's something magical about it. And I was telling Jude that if you really look at how that opening scene is structured, where like the hallways are just these very stark white. And, one of the reasons they did that, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is so that when Darth Vader enters and he's just like in pure black from head to toe, he stands out amongst everything else.
And then that 7-year-old kid in the audience, like me, goes, whoa, that dude's cool.
Doesn't say a word, just steps in, looks around and
looks
walks.
at his dead troopers like losers. So what else? Tell me about the whole movie though, Vader. What is it that draws that movie to you, or
it's just a classic, man. I can't sit here and tell you in detail about how it affected me. It just did. It was my first big time movie experience that I remember. It just had that effect on me.
The first time you saw a lightsaber, Obi-Wan versus Vader.
Coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we kind of saw Luke ignite it in the hut, so we kind of had an idea of what to expect. But like, I wish I could have been there for the first time. Like, what is this magical device? Right. This Excalibur of light? Like that must have been amazing. Just
everything from the land speeder hovering over the things and the Jawas and the big giant.
Oh, the sandcrawler.
And everything about that movie just screamed amazingness to me. It was awesome. And
Yeah, that cantina scene.
Yeah.
Oh my
See
goodness!
all the different aliens.
Yeah, I actually prefer the theatrical version
But
for that too.
the best part about that whole cantina scene is growing older and reading about how they made that, and it's just a bunch of old
Halloween
masks and stuff. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's good
Doing it
stuff.
on a budget.
First time you get to meet Han Solo and Chewbacca, like Harrison Ford just
Yep.
being the Harrison
Such a cool
40th
drink of
person
water.
you could. Yeah, it's like, man, he was just too perfect for that role. Like I don't think he wanted it. He didn't want it, and George didn't want him to be in it. I think because George was like, I don't want Harrison to be the guy that I put in all my
Right.
movies, right?
Well, he was helping George out by reading the sides for auditioning.
Yeah.
And George was just like, he's pretty good at this.
He's really good at this guy. He is kind
Yeah,
of
he
Han
had
Solo.
something visually completely different planned out for that character.
Oh yeah, I have the hardback copy of the original screenplay, and Han Solo is like a giant green lizard person or something. But they also had Kurt Russell play for Han Solo at one point. Like there's old videotapes of him auditioning with Carrie Fisher as Han Solo, and it's pretty funny because we were talking about him with Tango and Cash and stuff, and it's funny to see Lethal Weapon. It's funny to see how they kind of all these classic actors that we all watch and love kind of got their start at the same spot and kind of auditioned for
like
similar
that Saturday
roles.
Night Live sketch where Christopher Walken auditions for Star Wars as Han Solo. It's pretty good.
But, can you imagine anybody else in the role?
No, I can't.
You can't.
It kind of makes me sad that he doesn't really care about that character very much, but I can't imagine anybody else in it.
Well, acting has always just been kind of like a gig to Harrison Ford. Like he doesn't get too deep into it.
Yeah.
But one of the fun things I learned from, kind of watching YouTube with Jude about these movies was that bartender in the cantina scene where he's like, we don't serve their kind here. There's actually a book, like a Star Wars book, where they talk about his character and that bartender's
Yeah, he
backstory.
has a whole backstory.
And
Everybody has a
And
backstory.
his parents were killed by droids in the Clone Wars, and so that's why he has such a prejudice against droids.
Now, this book came out after the prequels, then, right? Or was this pre-prequels?
No, I think it came out after the prequels.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say because they started tying.
But it was really interesting.
Yeah, it is a good callback, and it kind of makes sense as to like the setup of the world. Like we watching the original trilogy and then watching the prequels, I didn't really, because I wasn't a huge fan of the prequels, but watching the original trilogy, you kind of connect these dots now. And I think we talked about it with Rogue One or something last week, where like all these people that are alive now in this trilogy were alive during the Clone Wars. So they got to see all these robots and droids killing all their family members and going to war and stuff. So it makes sense that they would have some kind of prejudice against them.
But I do wish George had taken a little bit more care in crafting the prequels to tie in better with the original trilogy.
Yeah, there's one thing that always sticks with me with the original trilogy and the prequels not really tying together is Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he's obviously like in his 60s, but according to the timeline, Anakin's only like 45 in Return of the Jedi.
but also like if you watch Revenge of the Sith, he asks once Anakin becomes Darth Vader, he asks the Emperor like what happened to Palpatine, or I'm sorry, what happened to Padme?
Oh yeah,
and Palpatine is like, in your rage you killed her, and this was while she was pregnant.
Yeah,
and so when he finds out Luke Skywalker is alive, and he's before the Emperor, he's like, how is that possible? Because like if he actually killed Padme, before she was able to have the kids, then Luke wouldn't be alive. And so like I'm just sitting there, I'm like, this doesn't really jive with how Revenge of the Sith ended. Because at that point, the moment Vader knows that he has a son that's alive and he senses it to be true, he should know that Palpatine lied to him and manipulated him. And so like you would think that would set him off to go down the path of betraying Palpatine ultimately, which he eventually does.
Yeah,
but,
I think it does.
But he also resists betraying him as well. So like within if you look at the original trilogy like in isolation, what Vader does works. It tracks through all three movies. But when you add in the prequels, there's some divergences there that don't make a whole lot of sense. Yeah,
I think the other thing too is Obi-Wan not knowing who R2-D2 was, seeing which he spent,
C-3PO.
or C-3PO, seeing which he spent most of the Clone Wars with or around them, knew them by name multiple times, and you're like, I don't remember ever owning any droids. Very interesting. Like, what, dude? R2's like, how dare you?
He didn't want to blow his cover.
Yeah, okay. Cover.
Old Ben.
And there's also the talk.
Yes, the other thing too is he's like, Ben Kenobi. I haven't been called Obi-Wan since before you were born. Like, no, you've never been called Ben.
Yeah.
Until he was born. It's little nitpicky things.
Well, also,
like that.
they still called him Obi-Wan after he was born.
Yeah.
There was also there was another thing that didn't make a whole lot of sense.
That's all right.
Padme
died. Oh, well, it's Return of the Jedi. But anyway, we don't have to bag on the prequels anymore. We did that for a full podcast already.
Yeah.
So
probably going to come up a couple more times.
let's talk about, like, we kind of mentioned the hero's journey, and we get to see Luke kind of like refuse the call to adventure with Obi-Wan. Like, I can't go to Anchorage, or I can't go to Alderaan. I'm late. I'm in for it as it is. I got to go home.
I got to farm.
I got to farm some moisture. and
One more season, and then I'm out.
Yeah, and then we get to see. I think one of the most impactful moments for me as a kid is seeing Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru as skeletons on the desert right in front of their homestead.
Super G-rated.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a traumatic thing.
It was very traumatic for me.
That and the sand person, like that. I told Jude, I was like, when I was a kid, that would scare the crap out of me.
Dude, I remember because like the shot of them as skeletons like smoldering in the distance was such a quick shot in the movie. Like when I was younger,
It was so gruesome.
I used to pause it to see because I was like, oh, I wonder how much they show. Like I just was curious, like morbidly curious as to what they.
It's the most nudity you'd ever seen in your entire child life.
It's like, man, those stormtroopers.
You're like, ooh, they don't have any clothes on.
They don't miss. Those stormtroopers don't miss, and they'll mess you up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What's the line that Obi-Wan says? Like, only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise.
Yeah.
and getting the arm cut off with all the blood.
Oh, yeah. There's blood in the cantina. Yeah.
Only blood in Star Wars.
Is it? What about the mist in
It's supposed
episode
to
1? Does that
cauterize.
count? It does cauterize, or it does now. I don't know. It didn't used to. But anyway, I like all these scenes that I remember by heart and all these lines and stuff. It's so much fun to go back and revisit.
And it is interesting seeing like the setting on Tatooine and watching, Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress, because a lot of where the Hidden Fortress is it's hidden in the mountains. And so you have this very stark rocky terrain, and it's almost like that was copied exactly for, the Tatooine portion of.
I'm gonna have to watch that movie.
Dude,
you're gonna have to read though. It's
it's all in.
I gotta read this movie.
Yeah, you gotta read this movie.
Okay.
It's in Japanese.
But you've said this multiple times, and I can't help but bring it up now because it'd be pointless not to. But this whole idea of like inspiration versus ripoff, where it's very, very clear that George Lucas just lifted ideas straight from Kurosawa films and brought them over to his own thing and kind of made them his own, or made them his own, and created this new world that we all fall in love with. But now today, if somebody says, oh, that's just a ripoff of this movie, like everybody rips movies off from everybody else that inspired them as kids or inspired them growing up.
But there's a difference
filmmakers.
between ripoffs and influences.
Is there though?
There is, yes.
I think it's in how
because
well you do
if you look at the Hidden Fortress and you look at Star Wars, they're two very different movies. But you can definitely tell the impact that the Hidden Fortress had on Lucas as a filmmaker, because like the transitional wipes are like he was influenced,
Rip-off.
but it wasn't a ripoff because lots of people use transitional wipes, but the way that they were used is something that George Lucas liked to communicate the passage of time, and that was something that Kurosawa kind of pioneered. Also, a big thing that Kurosawa did was like the multi-shot one take, where basically it's a single camera setup. But the way that it's blocked out, where the actor's moving and the camera moves and stuff like that, you go from like a wide shot to a close up to a medium shot, all within a single take.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, I mean, just look at any Spielberg movie. That's where Spielberg got it from. It's one of those things where, it's about efficiency in the camera and using like a long lens, but also, the way that you frame the shot. And, that was something that Kurosawa kind of pioneered, and that was something that was a big influence on Lucas as well.
That's all technical stuff. But I'm talking about like actual scenes and characters and moments in the story that are lifted straight from.
But I mean, like you could just say like, he ripped off Arthurian legend or something like that.
There's only 33.
No, 12.
Yeah, 12.
12 different stories to tell.
But you know, the point I'm trying to make is like it's not like if he had ripped off Hidden Fortress, it would have been the exact same story, exact same characters, just told in a slightly different way. Star Wars is its own story. It's this hero's journey of this farm boy who gets called into like a much bigger thing. The character of Luke Skywalker did not exist in the Hidden Fortress, and the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi is very different from the general played by Toshiro Mifune in the Hidden Fortress. The characters that are the most similar are actually the princess in the Hidden Fortress and Princess Leia, because they're both very headstrong, independent, like female characters who like lose their kingdom and have to like kind of rise up and rebuild the resistance to this evil rival empire.
Because George Lucas is a feminist SJW, right, Jude?
Patriarchy.
Because he wrote a female character to be strong and independent.
No
How dare he?
comment.
How dare he?
Oh, therefore he can't be a chauvinist.
Now, did you connect with Princess Leia at all growing up, or do you remember her?
I already
being,
asked her this question.
Did I?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
see, it's
you
been-
asked me who I most identify with.
And I was
And she said
surprised.
C-3PO.
Yeah, C-3PO.
Did
'cause he's nervous.
identify with Leia at all? I don't think so.
Wow, okay.
No.
Cool. Matt, what's your favorite part of this movie?
My favorite part of this movie?
Ultimate favorite part. Is it the Darth Vader reveal, or is it anything else later on?
I don't know. I always like the scenes of the Death Star when they're kind of like running.
Dog fighting?
No, not the dog fighting. Well, I mean, everybody likes that, but like the
Escaping.
the lightsaber fight
Okay.
when he kills Obi-Wan. That was a pretty powerful moment right there where they're running out into the bay with the ship and they're fighting over there in the corner and stuff. Yeah. So
Kadish, what's your favorite part of this movie?
I have so many favorite parts, but the thing that really kind of stands out to me the most is the climax where they're doing the assault on the Death Star. And I mean, that scene is just like, at the time it was a technological marvel, but if you look at how it plays out, they're like, you know, the stakes just keep getting bigger and bigger, and there's the ticking clock where like they're almost in range of the rebel base to destroy it, and there's so much at stake, and the rebels are getting like destroyed by like the minute Vader comes onto the scene and he just like messes up all their well thought out battle plans. And Vader's 2 seconds away from killing Luke, and then Han Solo swoops in. It's such a well structured final battle. And when you also couple that with the fact that it's so technically advanced for its time, and it still holds up to this day, like how well shot it was, I just think that makes the movie like what it is. That makes
there's really no scenes in this movie I don't like.
yeah.
I could sit there and I could watch this probably every day still if it's
Yeah,
if it's on.
there's always something that stands out in every scene.
Yeah.
You know, like she's rich. It's like,
Rich, powerful.
Yeah.
If you were to rescue her, the reward would be
there's
well,
not a lot
more
of,
money than you could imagine.
I don't know. I can imagine quite a bit. Yeah.
Like
there's not a lot of movies out there that if I'm flipping through the channels and it's on, I just stop
Yeah.
and don't start
I think-
and just watch. You know, so
the real thing that makes Star Wars stand out to me though is the world building aspect of it. Like they just have these little throwaway things that they kind of pepper into each of the original trilogy that make the world so much richer.
Yeah.
it's like I think back to when Ben was or Obi-Wan was talking to Luke in the
Clone
hut
Wars, yeah.
about the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And now look what we got. We got 3 movies and
7 seasons.
7
of a TV
seasons of
show.
an awesome animated show about the Clone Wars. You know.
Yeah.
But even little things like Han's exchange with Greedo about like how
yeah.
you should have turned me in like at this other place, and Greedo's like, I won't make that same mistake, and the whole thing with Jabba. But even like when Obi-Wan is turning off the tractor beam within the Death Star, there are these 2
sound
stormtroopers
effect.
there who are kind of like just talking,
Oh, yeah.
and they say something. I forget what exactly
Did
it
you
was.
get the new E11?
Yeah,
or something like that?
exactly. And it's just like little things like that are just prevalent throughout all 3 of these movies. Just make the universe feel so much more real and so much more interesting.
Jude, what's your favorite scene in A New Hope? Do you have one?
I don't think that I have one favorite scene. I enjoy just the storytelling of it.
Right on.
I do have a nitpick, though.
Oh. Go for it.
As is my way. No, I just thought that I think I'm the only person who feels this way, but I felt like Luke's reaction when he saw his aunt and uncle dead paled in comparison to when
Obi-Wan died?
No,
Yeah, you didn't even know?
Yeah.
Well, I always thought it was
And
funny.
like for the rest of the trilogy, he's just like, Ben, I sense you, I feel you, I love you, I adore you, I listen to you. Why didn't you tell me? Oh, I feel so betrayed. And these people raised him.
Yeah.
They were his parents protected him, and he just like kind of stares at him, and he's like, I guess I'll go find Ben.
There was a moment, God, I forgot what it was, but when it was the comparison of Luke and Leia. Like Leia literally just watched her planet get blown, like an entire planet. Your home world is gone, and she took it better than Luke took Obi-Wan dying, a guy he knew for like 20 minutes. I always thought that was super funny when somebody brought that up to me.
It was his
like,
first adventure.
and she's like. You know, like talking to him all soft, like, it's okay. Like, I just lost my entire planet. Would you grow up?
Yeah. Technically, I mean, are you even a princess anymore if your planet has exploded?
That's true, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're not a princess
she's
at nothing.
So what was the princess? I mean, we're getting into the weeds on this one, but what is the princess title for her? Is it for Alderaan or is it for Naboo?
At this time in movie making, in order for there to be
woman?
an important female character, she had to be royalty.
Okay.
Well, it was for Alderaan.
Was it for Alderaan and not Naboo? Because her mother technically was the queen of Naboo.
She was a double princess.
Double princess.
Like a double?
Well, her mom was just a senator at the time that she was
Former
born,
queen.
so-
Former queen.
Yeah, but it's an elected position.
Yeah, but isn't that like everybody who's a president still gets called Mr. President after they're not in office anymore?
Well, I mean, they weren't calling her Queen Senator Amidala.
That's in a galaxy far away, though.
This is true. This is very true. Thank you,
Long time
Jude.
ago.
All right, before we get into the next... Oh, what?
Just really quick.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to make sure they know this, that Han shot first.
Han shot first.
Yeah.
That was the worst addition.
Oh, it's still
to a
terrible.
hero.
They still can't fix it. They've I think they've gone through 4 different iterations.
Like they even had to go to the Solo standalone film to try to fix that.
Stop
What is that?
expecting perfection.
Exactly.
What is that thing that they where Greedo says something
he
now?
says McClunka.
McClunky. McClunky. It's okay, buddy.
They still can't get it right, man. Just put it back the way it was. It's ridiculous. Anyway, all right, before we get on to the best Star Wars movie ever created, that's right, I said it, the best one ever created. We're going to talk about the saltynerdclub.com. If you guys like what you hear, if you want to support this podcast, you can go to saltynerdclub.com. That takes you directly to our Patreon account. You can give us $1, you can give us $5, you can give us whatever you feel like you can give us to support and help grow this podcast and all this cool content we have. It will go towards... improving our audio quality, improving our equipment that we have, or just being able to make more content for you guys to listen to. Our retirement fund.
Pizza. Maybe
the Corona 19 relief fund.
Beer money.
Beer money. That's more important. You guys can go to saltynerdclub.com and donate some cash, some cheddar to the Salty Nerd podcast. Thank you very much. Moving on now to the Empire Strikes Back. The best movie ever freaking created.
So good.
So perfect. There is nothing wrong with this movie. Even the special editions couldn't
It's not the
mess
best
up this
movie
movie.
ever
It's the best movie ever created.
That's Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is number 2, okay?
Oh, y'all go fight.
I'm going to say it.
Take your shirts off.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it's a tie. I'll give you that. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is pretty goddamn good.
Terminator 2.
No.
Get out of here with that shit.
Nothing with Arnold Schwarzenegger counts.
Get to the chopper.
I'll be back.
Anyway.
That line was not in Terminator 2.
It wasn't?
Here.
It was in the original cut.
Empire Strikes Back. This is my personal favorite movie that is in the Star Wars universe.
Hands down.
Hands down.
Hands down.
It's so perfect. I can't think of anything I don't love about this movie. Straight off the bat, we're in the mix of things where we see the Star Destroyer throwing out the little probe droids trying to find the Rebel Alliance. We have Vader basically on just like this
Quest.
I wouldn't say
obsession.
It's like a blood feud, like obsession with trying to find out who destroyed the Death Star, who bested him in a.
Getting those dirty rebels.
I love it. I just love it so much. Kadish, you're better at doing this than I am. Set the table for Empire Strikes Back for me.
So it's the middle movie of this episode 4 through 6 trilogy, and arguably the best Star Wars film ever made. In fact, this is kind of the movie that I like to call the linchpin of this entire franchise, because without this movie, Star Wars would have been dead in 2015 probably or something, or at least 2018. But basically, this is the middle act of a much larger story, and this is where the good guys lose. And that alone just makes this movie so much more poignant. You get this romance between Han and Leia, and that kind of grounds the movie in a way that is very human and emotional. You've got Luke continuing along his journey and learning the ways of the Force, but failing, and not only failing but almost dying through his failure. And everyone in this movie really has an arc. It's even the Millennium Falcon has an arc in this movie, where the Millennium Falcon isn't working right. Its hyperdrive has been broken the entire movie, and then finally at the end of the movie, the hyperdrive gets fixed, and that's the ship's arc throughout the whole film is trying to get its hyperdrive fixed. But we also get introduced to a lot of new characters like Lando, and we get introduced to a lot of different aspects of the Star Wars universe, like asteroid fields and bounty hunters and all this other stuff. And it does everything a good sequel should do. It fleshes out the universe, expands the lore, it deepens our understanding of the characters. I mean, it's kind of funny because if you look at what they did with Infinity War with the Avengers, where they kind of made that movie, the main character is Thanos, and you get to know the villain of the story. That's what they did in Empire, which was arguably Darth Vader is the main character of the movie, and he's the one who we get more of a sense of in Empire Strikes Back. And the thing that struck me the most on my rewatch of this was how masterfully this film made the Empire such a threat. Because at the end of the first movie, the Empire is kind of like this behemoth, and it's very formidable, but they get dealt a huge defeating blow at the end of the first movie. And then in this movie, the very opening of the film, the first act, reestablishes the threat that the Empire poses. And the thing I love about how the bad guys are handled in this movie is the good guys are only as good as the guys that they're going up against. And the Empire in this movie, and in particular Darth Vader, is just such a good antagonist, such a good threat, because if you look at how they operate throughout the course of the movie, Vader is just so on top of things. He is just, every move that the good guys makes, he's already 2 steps ahead of them, and he checkmates them constantly. He lures Luke into a trap. He's able to, get the drop on Han Solo and Leia and stuff. And the opening scene of this movie, one of my biggest criticisms of The Last Jedi is that
you should not speak the name of that movie while talking about The Empire Strikes Back. New rule.
I kind of have to here because the military strategy in The Last Jedi makes no sense whatsoever. But if you look at the Battle of Hoth, there are 2 scenes leading up to the Battle of Hoth where basically Vader kind of explains what the error was that the Admiral made and coming out of light speed too early, and then it's very clearly stated that, okay, we have to do a ground assault to knock out the shield so that the ships can come in and wipe out the rebel base. Because as long as the shields are up, they can't do anything.
An orbital shot will not do
so
anything.
Vader's like, okay, land your troops outside the radius of the shield and advance. And then it cuts to Leia in the rebel base, and she's telling everyone what the strategy is to get the transports off the planet safely and where to rendezvous and stuff like that. And it's just 2 very quick scenes, but it sets up the logic of what the battle's supposed to be, and it does it expertly, and it makes perfect sense. And nothing in that battle makes you stop and go wait, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't take you out of the movie. Right. Whereas something like with The Last Jedi, you're like...
It's the exact same setup for the same exact battle because he wanted to do a callback to Empire, but there's no there's no reason for them to do that.
Yeah, it's like why didn't you fire on the transports before you fired on the planet? Because the planet's not going anywhere. You know, like why?
Well, not even that, but on Crate too, because they had the walkers and they walked from like 5 miles away. Like, why'd you do that? There's no. They could have just landed right in front of them. So anyway, I don't want to talk about The Last Jedi. I freaking hate that movie. Anyway, so how good is The Empire Strikes Back?
Empire Strikes Back's really good. And the reason it's so good is because the bad guys are really at the top of their game in this movie.
Yeah.
And the obstacles that they present to the heroes are so big and the stakes are so high that you just get invested in what's happening. Like even like if you look at the end, Vader specifically sabotaged the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive just on the off chance that they should escape because he knew that there was a possibility because these guys have been resourceful in the past. And like, you know, his plan was capture Luke, you know, bring Leia and Chewbacca back to his, you know, his ship and, you know, send Han off with the bounty hunter who they never refer to Boba Fett by his name, by the way, in the movie. It's always bounty hunter. And, you know, normally, like the bad guys wouldn't be expecting these guys to escape, and so they'd just leave the Millennium Falcon on its own. But Vader was like, "Well, just on the off chance,
just in case,
I'm going to make sure that you know I have this one ace up my sleeve."
Basically, I'm not going to let what happened last time happen again.
But it just shows like how formidable Vader is as an antagonist.
Yeah, and I think that's I when you're talking about it like that, what comes to my mind is the backstory of him being in the Clone Wars as Anakin in the cartoon and like learning all these strategies and working with the clone troopers and growing as like a military what is the word? Strategist. And I just, now that you're like bringing those things together, I'm like, oh man, that's a cool little like, yeah, he learned all that from the Clone Wars.
Yeah, but like even like when Han is going into the asteroid field to escape.
Oh yeah, asteroids do not concern me.
And Vader's like follow them into the asteroid field, and all of his subordinates are like, but sir, like we'll get pummeled to bits. He's like, I don't care, go after them. And like no other commander would have followed him into that situation, but Vader was just like, no, go for it.
Asteroids do not concern me, Admiral. I want that ship, not excuses. God, I love this freaking movie. Jude, tell me how much you love The Empire Strikes Back.
This is not my favorite.
What? Get off my podcast.
That's enough out of her.
Good Lord.
You're cut off.
Tell me you found it boring.
I didn't. No.
Okay.
No. It's just not my favorite. In fact, it's my least favorite of the
Really?
three. Yeah. It's just not as memorable for me. I'll pack my shit up and go.
Let me just drink my beer in sorrow.
I still like it. It's just it's not as enthralling as I find New Hope or
She's a
Empire
Return
Strikes Back.
of the Jedi gal.
Okay, I get it. It's two different, very, very different tones.
Return.
But is there anything that you want to talk about The Empire Strikes Back that strikes you as something that you remember about it?
Old baby Yoda.
Old baby Yoda. It's not baby Yoda.
No, it's old baby Yoda.
No, it's not. Is he a clone? What is he? Tell us, Jon Favreau.
When 900 years you are, look as good as you will not.
Matt
I love
Vader-
how kooky he is.
He is.
He just
is
is
kooky.
putting on this front of this just weird little alien.
Yeah.
And talk,
That's kind
Let's
of Yoda's
see if you
gig.
have patience.
and talk about subverting expectations, where like when you first meet him and you're like, who's this annoying little alien? And then it's like, oh, he's the
Turns
Jedi.
out-
He's the Jedi Master. War, not make one great. Yeah. It's cool looking back now because there's, of course, there's a freaking argument in the fandom of whether or not Yoda is playful and like joking, messes around, if he has that personality trait, or if he was just strictly a joke on Luke or to try and get him to fall. It
was a test.
It was a test.
Well, I
or
think-
if Yoda actually does have those personality traits that we see every so often
I think
hinted.
Yoda has a sense of humor for sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so
I think
too.
he has a sense of humor, but also when you are in isolation for so long, you get a little kooky.
Kind of lose it. I think
Yeah.
when I did, I live tweeted The Empire Strikes Back last week or whenever I watched it, and that was one of the things I said. Like, this dude's been on a swamp planet for like 20 years,
Yeah.
all alone. Like, yeah, he's a little, out there.
He's hanging out with Qui-Gon.
Yeah, in the spirit world.
I mean, how many of us have gotten like that in quarantine with our kids? Just like lost it one
gosh.
day and just
My
been
kids
like,
are gone.
oh, whatever.
I got to get my kids out of the house.
There's another disconnect here, though, where Obi-Wan keeps referring to Yoda being
His old master.
And
Was I any different when you
and
talked?
that was not very well established in the prequels.
No, well, okay, so there's like a little thing in episode 2 where like Yoda's basically like the kindergarten teacher. He teaches all the young ones. So technically, he was Obi-Wan's master at one point in time. But the way it comes off in context of The Empire Strikes Back, it seems like Obi-Wan was the apprentice of Yoda first and foremost. Yeah. And so they kind of changed. That's a little bit of a retcon there. Matt, before we get off into the weeds too much, because I love this movie, Matt, what are your thoughts on The Empire Strikes Back?
It's the best one.
Yeah.
By far. Absolutely.
Do you have any favorite moments? Anything that you remember like just really struck you about this movie?
I remember being kind of flabbergasted in the scene when Vader walks into the Emperor's hologram chamber or whatever that is. Because, when I was 11, I think, when this movie came out, and here comes Darth Vader walking in, and he's kneeling down to this big-headed hologram. It's like, well, who's this guy? And that was our first introduction to the Emperor. And it was pretty cool.
Do you remember which version of the Emperor do you remember most? Do you remember the old version, or do you remember the new Ian McDermott version?
I remember Ian McDermott version the most now, but. No, that was a long time ago.
Edition, isn't it?
And it wasn't.
Or no, that's prequel edition.
I was 11.
Yeah.
So it's not like, and we didn't go watch.
That's interesting.
Those movies 15 times when they came out. I think I saw the movie twice. Probably.
That's interesting because I grew up on the VHSs of the theatrical versions. So the version that I always lean back on, and I don't actually like the new Ian McDermott.
It's like I know what the original version looks like, but I still see Ian McDermott in my head when I think about it.
Yeah, he had that weird eye.
Yeah. I remember the original theatrical version where it was like, I think it was voiced by Alec Guinness. It was because they didn't get anybody else to do it, but they got Alec Guinness to do the voiceover, and then they had a woman in a mask with a hood on.
Right.
And that was the version that I got attached to in this movie. And when I saw after the prequels came out and they went back and retrofitted Ian McDermott in there, I think they changed what he actually said. The lines were different also, and I didn't like it. I was like, what the heck, man? Where's my
Palpatine.
Yeah, like I like the original theatrical version Palpatine. I think that was one of the things I didn't like about it.
The dark side.
This movie introduced so much cool stuff to the lore. It's like Kate was saying, we got Boba Fett and Bosk and IG-88 and the bounty hunters and Slave One,
AT-AT.
Colonel Star Wars. There was so many toys.
Which is how you correctly pronounce that.
Yeah, for sure.
AT-ATs.
It's not AT-ATs, it's AT-AT.
But
Super Star
the first appearance of Yoda was always cool to me. I always think of the scene when Yoda raises the X-wing out of the swamp. It's incredible. We're like, that's some deep stuff there, man.
John Williams, can we just talk about John Williams for a minute? Like, he just knocked it out of the park with this, dude. Like, the music was incredible. And something that I learned, I love listening to the soundtrack show. And one of the things that David W. Collins kind of educated me on is the amount of interconnected material within the music itself with the original trilogy, where there's actually notes and phrases within the music of Yoda's theme that aligns with the Rebel theme. And when I listen to him break it down and kind of play those two tracks over each other, and you hear the similar wavelength that the theme music has, it was incredible to me. I'd never really thought about it before, but like watching those scenes now, I have such a bigger appreciation for John Williams and for the story itself, and showing Yoda, like showing off his Force powers. But like watching The Empire Strikes Back for me as a kid, I think the thing that struck me the most was just how the heroes that you love so much and are always rooting for are constantly on their heels. They never ever have the upper hand.
Never get a break.
I'll never forget the first time I saw Darth Vader in his chamber.
Oh yes,
and the helmet's coming down, and they're over this scarred, battle, gross head. You're like, what the hell does he look like?
Yeah. And that was the first time we ever got a hint.
Oh my God, what is under that mask? It's just like.
So we really didn't have a hint as to what was going on with Vader, why he was in the suit until that moment. And we're like, whoa, something's wrong with this guy. That's why he's in this outfit.
Yeah, but Vader's such a boss.
Oh my gosh, dude. He takes
I would never want to be a general underneath him.
No prisoners, man.
It is funny how he keeps killing off the incompetent subordinates. And every time he does it, you can just see like that final shot where the Millennium Falcon gets away and everyone on the bridge is just like, oh, they're just waiting to see what he does. And he just like turns around and leaves and everyone's just like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
I think when I originally saw this, the whole like he's more machine than man thing, I think I just thought he was getting like, he chose that. He was getting upgrades. He like decided to become more machine than man. I didn't know the story. Did you guys know the story?
No, I don't think anybody did.
Yeah.
Nobody did it.
Okay, so I didn't know that there was anything wrong with him. I never thought that there was anything like that had been medically intervened. I just thought, oh, he decided he would be more powerful as part machine.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah, that's probably a good take, especially not knowing the backstory before the prequels came out. Yeah, I like that. It's a good idea. Anyway, so yeah, like the thing that like really draws me to this movie, and I don't know if I'm just crazy in my head or something, but like the fact that the heroes that we root for are constantly on their heels at every step of the way. Like we start out, like first thing that happens is Luke gets like half eaten by a wampa.
Yeah.
Right. We get to see him. His face is all bloodied up and scarred. He's hanging upside down, and we get to see
the reason for that?
Because Mark Hamill got in a motorcycle accident and messed up his face.
Yep.
So they had to come up with a reason why his plastic surgery looked a little different.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that trivia.
Come on, man.
That's like that Twitter account that asks, like, did you know that Harrison Ford played Han Solo?
Katie's over here trying to get all.
Did you know?
Did you know this? Did you know this?
I learned it when I lived in Hollywood. And well, I think that this is the reason why there are clauses in people's contracts now, like why you can't
Oh, yeah.
go skydiving if you're about to shoot a movie.
Oh, man. Anyway, so, yeah, like, just... Like I love not the anticipation, that's not the right word to say, but like just the struggle of of watching our heroes. He's the writer.
All good thoughts come from Kadish.
I love watching our heroes just continually try and gain the upper hand and fail every time. Like we get Han Solo, like right off the bat, like you were saying, the Millennium Falcon's in rough shape. It's not dealing with the cold very well. It's got broken parts. He's trying to fix it with Chewie. And I think one of my favorite things about The Empire Strikes Back is the relationship between Han and Chewie, where they're constantly yelling at each other. Like, no, don't fix that one. Fix this one. What are you doing? I just took that thing apart. Now you're putting it all back together. Like, I love that banter. And it was between not only Han and Chewie, but also between Han and Leia, which is such a cool little, like, a way of building a romance between two people.
I love he's negging her the whole movie. And he's like, your worship.
Such a snarky
And then by
little
the time she tells him, I love you, he's just like, I know.
Scruffy looking nerf herder.
Scruffy looking.
The relationship between all the characters in this movie are just freaking on point. I love it. Every little bit of it just feels so good to be with our heroes again, but then at the same time to watch them just be like, oh crap, what's going to happen now? Oh crap, they got to get out of this situation. Like through the entire movie, they're in a pinch, and I just
they're always at a disadvantage.
Yeah, they're always on their heels. They're always at a disadvantage. They're always trying to get to the next step and ultimately failing. I don't know what it is, man, but this movie gets me.
There was so much cool stuff introduced in this movie. Yoda was introduced in this movie. Lando was introduced in this movie.
I mean, he's all right.
It's the most charming man in the galaxy.
So much
Got
of
a whole
our
city full of clouds.
so much of our Star Wars lore came out of this movie. It was good stuff.
Frank Oz just nailing it.
I really love the alien puppets. Like there's just something about the aliens being puppets in Star Wars that made them feel more real than the CGI version.
It was a weird offshoot of like that old 70s like Labyrinth with what was that, David Bowie?
I said it felt like very like Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
The puppets.
Yoda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Yoda, but other aliens as well. One of the things I really like about like a show like Farscape is they did the whole puppets as aliens thing. And I guess it might just be my own personal taste, but like I really enjoy that aspect of it.
There's
like,
something nostalgic
like the guys in suits and then like the weird puppets and like Jabba being a puppet and stuff like that. There's just something about it that makes it feel more real than when they're just completely CGI.
And that's
because they are real.
Yeah. But it's kind of a tough sell though, because honestly, when I watched like Labyrinth and some of those older movies from the 70s that have puppetry and stuff like that, and what was it, The Dark Crystal or whatever, It doesn't. I don't like it. It doesn't get me. I'm like, no, that's clearly a puppet. But something about the way
I have never, ever in my life looked at Yoda, the original Yoda, and my brain thinks puppet.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I think of puppets, I think of the Muppets. I think of Kermit and Miss Piggy, but I've never thought, I never picture Frank Oz's hand up Yoda's butt, moving his arms and face around. I never, ever think that.
There's something magical about this that makes Yoda a real character.
I think a lot of it has to do with the environment that he's in,
Yeah.
because he's already in such an alien environment, and he looks like he fits in because he looks like a frog, and they're in a swamp. So he's already kind of like a part of this world that they created on Dagobah, and it sells it 100%. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think Puppet Yoda worked in the prequels, because Puppet Yoda in the prequels was like, what is that thing? It's clearly a puppet, because he was in like a stark, like, real environment with like walls and flooring and cushions and this and that. But when you put him in the swamp, it just kind of, I don't know, man. The only puppet that's ever worked for me on screen is Yoda. Like, you take a puppet in any other movie, I'm like, nah, that's a puppet, bro. But Yoda, it's like, no, that's Yoda. That's Jedi freaking Master Yoda.
But we actually get to see Luke train to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
And we get the sense that he's been experimenting with force powers when at the beginning when
he can barely get a lightsaber out of the snow.
Yeah, but you get a sense that he's been trying to like learn this himself, and then we finally get to see like him train with like a Jedi Master, and so like his ability to like jump out of that carbonite freezing chamber at the last second, stuff like that. It's all justified by
Very
the time you
impressive.
get there.
Yeah.
And this is simple setup payoff.
It's very important to a hero's journey to make sure that you set up the abilities that they have from the beginning and watch them learn how to use them. That's the most important
They're not just
thing.
given to them by the story.
I think, so I have a really, really good friend of mine that I work with, and he doesn't like this movie, and he's a huge Star Wars nerd, and me and him will go back and forth with movie lines, and we'll throw quotes back and forth at each other, but like, he's like, no, man, I just thought the whole Dagobah thing was boring. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't know what it is about me, but when I watch Dagobah, even though it's like a kind of a low point as far as the action goes in this movie,
That
to me,
cave scene.
it's the most enthralling part of this movie is watching Luke discover the fact that this is a Jedi Master. And he's like, no, Ben, tell him I'm ready. And he's like, I want to train as a Jedi. And then you get these lessons from Yoda that are so on point. Like, is the dark side stronger? No. Just quicker and easier and whatever the line
more
he said.
seductive.
More seductive. And I'm like, man, this is
But it's funny because like the middle
dropping
of
some knowledge.
the middle of this movie, so you have two main storylines that kind of diverge at the end of the first act, where you have Han and Leia being pursued by the Empire, and then you have Luke who's off on Dagobah on his own, and yet Vader is a persistent threat in both storylines. If you look at that scene where Luke goes into the cave to confront whatever's in there, and Yoda kind of tells him like, you won't need your weapon, and Luke's just kind of like, oh, I'm taking my weapon, and then he goes in there and he has a showdown with Vader. But then the symbolism of like him cutting off Vader's head, and then like within the mask, it's actually Luke, and that kind of setting up the whole like temptation of like what the dark side actually is and how it gets a hold of you.
So deep.
Yeah, I mean, like it's so well set up, especially like when we get to the third movie and he's confronting Palpatine, and it's not an issue of like, oh, you got to kill this guy. It's like, if you kill him, you're giving in to the dark side and doing exactly what he wants. And that cave scene kind of perfectly encapsulated the struggle that he was going to be facing, not only at the climax of this movie, but in the next movie as well. And it was just very well done.
Little nerd trivia question, but did you guys know that they actually had a fake Mark Hamill head set up and created to be inside the Vader mask, but then when they shot the video of it, it looked terrible. So what they did instead was they got Mark Hamill to stick his head through a hole and put the helmet around him and then shot it again.
Face already kind of looks terrible throughout the movie.
It's terrible, Jude.
I do have a comment for what your coworker was saying about that whole part of the movie that seemed boring to him. I feel like there's something to be said for when Luke kind of he lands and he meets Yoda and he doesn't know who Yoda is yet. I think that there's something very petulant about him, that he's like, ugh, I don't have time for this annoying alien. I'm basically a Jedi anyway. And there's just something so immature and petulant about his character at that point. So maybe that's what your coworker wasn't liking about that whole
Maybe.
like part of the movie, was just like that Luke is basically an asshole to this Jedi master until the second he found out who Yoda was. And then he was all of a sudden like, no, I mean, I'll do whatever you say.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he wasn't a jerk to Yoda.
Yeah. That was what, test number 1 that he failed or whatever. You're like,
Failed that test. Man.
Yeah.
Luke just keeps failing his test left and right.
yeah. Which I'm going to
part of
bring
his
this up.
character.
We might as well bring it up now because there's no real structure to this podcast. But I wanted to ask you guys, like this idea that's like floating around the internet nowadays is that like Luke's constant failure is a way of justifying his failure later on in life. But I'm watching this movie and I'm seeing him fail time after time. Do you guys think that him leaving Dagobah to go and save Han and Leia was actually a failure, or was that more of? I'm going to ask you first because you haven't talked in a while. But
Oh, good.
is it
I don't have an answer.
you don't?
Yes, I really don't know.
Give me that microphone.
I really don't know.
Do you feel like that was a failure, or do you think that was the right thing to do? Him leaving and going to Bespin.
I don't know. I don't know.
Jude?
I think that there is no right or wrong answer to that. I don't think that it was a mistake because ultimately what happened was supposed to happen. But I don't think that it was what Yoda or Ben or Obi-Wan, whatever. I don't think it's what they wanted for him, but it's the path that Luke chose for himself. But ultimately he chose the right path anyway, so.
Kadish, what do you think?
Well, it goes to the crux of the character of Luke, where basically he places the lives of his friends and family above anything else. And he's willing to sacrifice everything for their sake and himself. He's part of everything. So,
I mean, except for his aunt and uncle.
well, I mean, like I'm sure, like if he was there when they were being attacked, he would have done everything he could to save them. But I mean, it goes to the fundamental aspect of the character of Luke is that he embodies hope. He is the new hope in Episode 4, and this idea that he's unable. Like Obi-Wan and Yoda both want him to complete his training at the expense of his friends' lives. And he's unwilling to make that sacrifice. But that's also because of that moral center of his where he's just loyal to a fault to the people that he cares about. That's also the thing that ultimately redeems Vader, because Luke is the one person in the universe who never gave up on him, who was willing to go the distance and sacrifice his own life in order to save the life of this father that he never knew. And that is the crux of what makes Luke Skywalker a true hero, is that he's willing to do the hard thing when everyone else is unwilling to do that. And this idea that, you're talking about later on in the sequels, and I'm sure we'll talk about this next week, that he basically loses that as he gets older and becomes this fallen hero, this hermit who basically forsakes his own family and his duty and his responsibility to the galaxy. That's so out of character from the Luke that we see in these 3 movies that it literally ruins it for everyone who's a fan of that character.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was trying to get to. Is like this movie is the reason why we fall in love with Luke, and Yoda and Obi-Wan have essentially given up on Anakin or Vader as a being redeemed. Like, no, we're training you to go and kill him and stop him. Like, that's their whole point and mission is to raise Luke, make him a Jedi, and have him face Vader and kill him and Palpatine to destroy the Sith. But Luke is like, no, there's another way, and I'm gonna. They didn't believe it, even in the Return of the Jedi, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they were like, no, the Emperor's already won if you're not willing to kill your father.
Yeah, and if you look at it from a structural point of view, this segment of Luke's journey where he is failing, this is in the hero's journey in the greater scheme of things, this falls into the whole test allies and enemies, approaching the innermost cave and having the ordeal. Those are like the 3 parts, the 3 phases of this hero's journey based off of the structure that Lucas was following. And so it's not that he's failing, it's that he's meeting these obstacles that are teaching him what he has to do in order to progress as a character. And that's the real difference here is that, this is a just a part of this journey that Luke is on, where he has to go through these failures in order to come out stronger on the other side. And I think a lot of people who make the argument against that kind of miss the point of all this stuff.
Yeah.
But there are two parts of this movie I want to talk to you guys about before we get moving on.
I'll talk about anything Empire Strikes Back. Go ahead.
So the first thing is the most iconic one of the most iconic parts of this movie, in my opinion, is that scene where Han Solo is getting frozen in carbonite and he's being lowered down in there. And, like he has that exchange with Leia where she finally admits, I love you. And that's like the culmination of her arc.
Yeah.
Where she allows herself to be vulnerable and actually like admit her feelings for this guy. And you can even see like glimpses of this in A New Hope where she's like looking at Han as he charges off after the stormtroopers, and she's
You came in that thing? You're braver than I thought.
But no, this is after that where she's
I know, but it's still a lie.
But like the look on her face when he does that, like you can tell like she's
What a
turned
man.
on.
What a
Exactly.
man.
Yeah.
Look at him and his hot rod.
And that scene, like as he gets frozen in carbonite and the music swells and like the mist is coming up around Vader's helmet. And like
What a scene.
And you just get this, and Chewbacca's screaming because he's seeing his friend get frozen like that, and like everything about that scene just like it's almost celebrating the victory of the bad guys. And it's just so emotional and poignant. And I want to know what you guys felt when you first saw that scene.
I'll let you guys. I got goosebumps, so I'll let you guys go first. Go ahead, Vader. Do you remember that scene? What is it about?
Well, yeah, I remember
It's the carbon freezing scene.
What did I feel?
Yeah, what do you feel when you watch that?
I feel like Kadish set it up so much that no matter what we say, it's all just going to be like, bleh.
I felt.
You might be right.
I had feelings and I felt them.
I
You
felt
go.
like it probably hurts to get frozen in carbonite.
Jude.
You guys put so much stuff into these things. All
What do
these
you mean?
thoughts
What
and
did we
processes, and write all these books and novels. It's like,
It must suck to get frozen.
yeah, it probably sucks to get frozen. So I don't know, whatever.
Jude, how did you feel about that?
You know what? Just to tack on what Vader said, yeah, it looks like
Why
it
are you
hurts.
having a southern accent?
God damn, she went South County there.
Yeah, she did. I feels good.
I had feelings and I felt them. Now you go.
That's it? Okay. Well, all right,
No,
Kadish, I'll be on your level.
Yeah, I don't know. You set it up so much.
Yes, give us
It's
10
just
minutes of how you felt
Yeah, man,
when
that
Han
was
Solo went into
awesome.
That is
Carbonite.
it's the lowest of the low. It's
Yeah.
like your heroes are out of the game. Like you're done. You lost. Congratulations. Welcome to the Empire.
And yet
Here's
it's
your
not
cell.
over.
And yet it's not over. But they still lose anyway.
No, that's what I mean. Like it's a pretty low point.
Yeah, which
and
is
yet
the part of
there's
this-
still more load to come because he's like, I'm going after Luke now.
Yeah, and it's kind of the whole job of this sequel to bring your heroes to their lowest point, so that when they rise from that in the third story,
Yeah.
it's an even more triumphant victory.
And this, like from Vader's perspective, this wasn't even like his like.
Vader or the real Vader?
No. From
he was
Darth
doing-
Vader's perspective, it wasn't even like, this is what I'm going to do to you. It was just like, this is a practice
Yeah.
for what I'm really going to do to Luke. So let's just make sure it works and it doesn't kill him. So if it's going to kill him, I'd rather it kill this guy.
Yeah.
You know,
He's
And
expendable.
yeah, he was expendable. So
You were gonna say something?
sorry.
Okay.
No.
I love this scene. I think it's the ultimate bad guy like montage where you have like Boba Fett there and you've got the steam and the orange coloring with the blue, which is like scientifically
the cinematography.
Yeah, the
That's
cinematography in this episode is
the
freaking
set design.
Yeah. I mean the blue and orange is like scientifically studied to make humans react in a certain
and you
way.
know, going back to Kurosawa, so like if you look at the Hidden Fortress, he uses fog in that movie like a master. Like it's such a integral part of certain scenes. The way Kurosawa always uses some type of weather in his movies, and Irvin Kershner, the guy who directed Empire Strikes Back, in this scene he uses the steam and the fog. In much the same way that Kurosawa employs it in the Hidden Fortress. It's so
good.
masterfully done.
So good.
Yeah.
That scene where the steam rises up and you just see Vader's helmet and you got the music and the sound of all the machinery and stuff. You're like, dang, man. Like it hits on all cylinders on that that point.
And that setting is actually the part of the second thing I wanted to talk about, which was Luke's confrontation with Vader. This is the first time that Luke and Vader meet face to face. And when George Lucas saw the first cut of Empire, and he watched this scene, and Vader has is fighting Luke one-handed. He lost his stuff because he's like they're supposed to be like
Excalibur,
like samurai.
Heavy. Yeah.
They're supposed to always fight with two hands. And Kirshner was like, well, we had a plan for this, and it's really interesting if you watch the fight between Luke and Vader, because at first Vader kind of underestimates Luke, and he's fighting him one-handed because he's toying with him. He's kind of like testing to see like how much he's learned. And then once Luke starts like kind of like manhandling him, like kicking him off like platforms and stuff, Vader's not having any of it.
No, he gets pissed.
And so like when he comes back, he just starts like messing Luke up. And so like there's this kind of like progression of the showdown where, at first it's all like, like I'm just trying to get you into this freezing chamber and it's all too easy. And then like, oh, impressive. And then he's like, oh, I got kicked off the platform. And so now
I feel like that was almost part of his plan.
No, I think that Luke actually kind of surprised him. And that's why in the next scene when he runs into him in the hallway,
not taking any prisoners.
No, he's messing him up.
What I thought was interesting too. This is like a super deep cut, but during that very scene, like right after he gets kicked off the ledge, Luke goes down this little labyrinth of tunnels and he finds his way into this hallway and right next to the big window. You don't hear anything, which is weird because Vader's got this very iconic breathing and you can always hear it. And that's how you know he's coming. That's how, like in Rogue One, you heard the breathing before you saw the lightsaber type of thing, but you don't hear anything until you see the lightsaber come down. And then all of a sudden you hear Vader like he was holding his breath. He was holding his breath so he wouldn't give away his position. I love that stuff,
Using
man.
the Force. Force breath.
I mean, like Vader throughout this entire movie is such a force to be reckoned with. Like he doesn't suffer fools easily. Like he literally, now that Tarkin's not around to rein him in, he like just starts killing the people who fail to do their job to his satisfaction.
Yeah.
But also like he's doing things like like I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it again. And like he's just like he takes control of every situation that he's in. And in this final fight with Luke, he's like when Luke kind of gets tossed out of that window and he like climbs back up on the scaffold and he's trying to find his way back inside Cloud City, and Vader surprises him and just starts like just going ham on
Putting
him
the hammer down on that dude.
with his
Things off the
lightsaber.
walls and stuff.
But he's like just like Luke is just completely outmatched by his saber skills, and then he loses his hand, and at that point, now that Vader's kind of like has him at his mercy, at that point, that's when Vader's like, okay, now you're going to come with me. And even after Luke chooses to throw himself to his death as opposed to like join Vader, Vader is still trying to like track him down and capture him, at the end there.
Oh yeah.
Because like he still, Vader is just so like relentless and obsessed with, achieving this goal. And the whole like reveal that Vader is Luke's father.
God, you're just blowing through this whole movie, dude.
Well, I mean, like that's part of the scene, and that was like, I can't remember, I wasn't in the theater when that bomb was dropped, but can you imagine being in the theater and having that moment come up and everyone being like, "What the?"
That's exactly what it was.
Were you in the theater when you saw it?
Yeah.
Okay, please recount the.
It was just like he just saw. I mean, it was a long time ago.
I know.
But I just remember everybody being completely surprised. It's like, he's what? Darth Vader's Luke's dad? No, he's lying. It can't be
Search
true.
your feelings.
People thought he was lying.
Yeah, but then, you kind of think back to the swamp scene where Luke's in the helmet and all that kind of stuff, and he kind of tie it together. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe he isn't lying. And yeah, it was a shock. It was definitely one of those classic moments, one of those big WTF moments in the movie theater, and everybody's like, whoa. It was wild.
I'm so jealous of people
Didn't
who were
they
there.
keep that a secret in the script also
Yes.
until
Oh, yeah.
the last minute?
Oh yeah. Nobody knew except for George Lucas. I think David Prowse knew, but that was because he spoke German. Lucas knew, and James Earl Jones knew because James Earl Jones got a different type of script. And I think one of the stories that Mark Hamill always talks about is like, I was in the theater, I was sitting next to Harrison Ford, and Harrison goes, "You didn't tell me that, kid." He's like, I wasn't supposed to tell you.
This was long before the
internet.
The internet days. And everything got
WikiLeaks
ruined.
and all this other nonsense.
You want to know why I think this movie turned out so good?
It's because George Lucas had the A-team, director, Kushner. He had the A-team of the writers with Kasdan, and then he had the world building of George Lucas, the cinematography, the Phil Tippett who did the AT-AT. I mean, this is like
Yeah, like 3 different dudes playing Vader.
Dude, you did too.
I was gonna say, I think the reason this turned out so good is like this is the one Star Wars movie, the original trilogy, that George Lucas had the least involvement in.
Ouch. Shots fired. It's his
No,
birthday, dude.
It's very true.
And,
It is true, though.
It's a birthday roast.
The real people behind this movie, it came down to 3 people. It was Lawrence Kasdan, who was the screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
It was Irving Kershner, who was the director, and he was also George Lucas's former film professor at USC. And it was Gary Kurtz, the producer. And Gary Kurtz was really kind of like the driving factor in both A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, because he was the one who really wanted to put the characters kind of at the forefront and have it be about like their relationships and their struggles, as opposed to like the big overarching kind of like blockbuster plot that was Lucas's strong suit. And throughout the course of making this movie, Kershner and Kurtz went over budget. They went over, over schedule. And because of these budget overruns, because initially Star Wars was actually being financed by Lucas, and he had to go to Fox to get money to finish the film, and Fox demanded that he give up part of his, merchandising rights in order to, justify the cost of, these overruns. And it was because Lucas had to give up that sizable chunk of money that he ended up firing Kurtz and Kushner for the 3rd film and bringing on a whole new creative team for that.
Bad move, man. Should have kept him. This movie is just so damn perfect.
It is. I was telling Matt earlier.
You just settle down.
Well, I was telling Matt earlier, I was so shocked at how elegant and well done these movies are, even 30 years after they've been made, especially in comparison to like the sequels that we've gotten from Disney. Like there's just no comparison. Like, Matt was talking earlier about how that scene where Vader kneels down to a holographic version of Palpatine. There's that exact same scene in The Force Awakens where they're in front of a holographic version of Snoke. Yeah. And it doesn't carry any of that same weight or like, just being like, oh, wow, that's our first look at the Emperor.
Too soon. It was too soon.
Why is Snoke so big?
Oh, you remember the theory that he was like some kind of a giant?
He's a
or something
giant.
Like that? Yeah, I remember all that.
The Emperor's head was 20 feet wide in the Empire, so why couldn't Snoke be big?
Yeah.
But this whole trilogy, but this movie in particular, is really the heart of what Star Wars is to me, which is these underdogs who are just constantly overcoming impossible obstacles at great personal sacrifice, and that's the message of any good war movie, really.
Yeah.
Is the ability for heroes to sacrifice themselves for the greater good, and nothing encapsulates that more than Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion.
I 100% agree with you. Real quick, going around the table, favorite scene, Jude. Favorite scene from Empire Strikes Back.
Come back to me.
Matt Vader, favorite scene from Empire Strikes Back. Don't say come back to me.
Just like haters talk for both of us.
No, shut up, you guys. Come on.
There's so many.
Favorite. What
Probably the dad reveal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Has to be the dad reveal. It's like, I'm your father. It's like, okay, that was like we said.
Yeah.
That blew the theater up. So I'll go with that.
God, I'm so jealous.
I guess mine's probably the training in the swamp.
With Yoda?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
It's really an important part of
That scene where Yoda lifts the X-Wing out of the water.
That's pretty sweet.
The music
Proves
is so
size
amazing.
matters not.
Yeah. Luminous
Yes, it does.
beings are we? Not this crude matter. God, there's so many good lines.
I
in
always
this movie.
liked how they went into the Force in this movie.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have to have it explained to us with midi-chlorians and that kind of nonsense.
I think it was explained perfectly. in
I
this
did
movie.
too. That's why I
don't-
was so upset with the.
I don't
new
really
stuff.
believe there needs to be any more explanation than what's in Empire. I feel like it's perfect the way it is. My favorite scene, I'll just go real quick. It's got to be when Luke walks up the staircase towards Vader and he pulls out his lightsaber and ignites his lightsaber in front of Vader, and then they cross blades for the first time. Like that. Gosh, just thinking about it, man, gets me amped. Like just watching it, like, yes, I'm rooting for Luke, but I know he's going to fail every time. But I'm like, yes, he's got it this time. He's got it this time.
And that image of like Vader's silhouette against the blue background.
Dude. Gosh, if any movie is going to get me into like filmmaking and cinematography and lighting and all that stuff, it's going to be this one. Like
So
if I
beautifully
ever-
shot.
Well, they don't do it that way anymore.
I know it's all CGI.
It's all done on a computer now.
Anyway, Kadish, what's your absolute favorite scene from this movie?
I really like the "I love you, I know" scene where Han Solo is getting frozen in carbonite.
Romantic at heart.
There's just so much emotional weight to that scene, and it's something that it's so iconic and it's so tragic at the same time and so heartbreaking. But it's the most true emotional moment in the entire series, I think.
And
Now-
you said when we were watching this that you thought that Harrison Ford had ad-libbed.
He did.
He did, yeah.
He did ad-lib that.
Yep.
They froze him, right? Because they didn't know if he was going to come back for the third movie.
Yep.
Yeah, I think was it Kasdan and Harrison both wanted to kill off
It was Gary Kurtz.
Gary Kurtz? Okay.
Yeah.
So I know Harrison Ford wanted to also because he
Yeah.
talks about that all the time. He was like, I told George just to kill my character off to make it like, because I didn't want to come back for the third one or
What a
whatever.
jerk.
But George, well, this is like testament to George too, because I know we kind of rag on him a little bit for some of his ideas and stuff. But like one of the things about George is like, no, I want these movies to be hopeful. I want these movies to be give people a good feeling at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
to kill off one. I'm never going. He's like, I'm not going to kill off any
Gary
of the main
Kurtz's
characters.
vision for how the saga should have ended was a bit of a downer.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was like Luke Skywalker. He wins, but at the same time he kind of loses. Han Solo dies.
yeah.
Leia goes on to like lead the New Republic, but she's all alone. There was like this bittersweet ending planned, and I'm kind of glad that George kind of stepped in and said like, no, we're not going to do that. But then Disney comes in and ruins everything. So
You can't help but mention it, can you?
yeah.
No, I'm. This is the one time that I'm going to be on George's side 100%. Like I feel like that hopeful ending and not killing off any of your main characters was a big positive point for this trilogy. I think I'm glad he stuck with his guns on that. Although I am glad that he gave the reins over to some more capable people when it came to directing and writing some of these movies. All right, real quick, before we get on to our next subject, which is Return of the Jedi, I just wanted to let people know who are listening. If you guys are interested in supporting the podcast and you want some cool stuff, you can go to saltynerdstore.com. We've got coffee mugs, t-shirts with different sayings from the show, like be a salty justice warrior or ambassador of estrogen, or you can be a bat rat spider crab or whatever stuff. We have like funny little sayings from the TV show that you guys can, or TV show from the podcast that you guys can go and
Also, we're coming out with a TV show.
yay
Spoiler.
TNT. No, you guys can go to saltynerdstore.com, check out all of our stuff there, and anything you buy, of course, goes to helping the podcast grow so that we can make more awesome content. Are you guys ready to talk about Return of the Jedi?
Heck yeah.
I was born.
The Return of the Jedi, the last in this original trilogy of films by George Lucas that were just incredible. We catch up with our heroes. We get to see them fail in Empire Strikes Back. Han is lost to Jabba the Hutt and the bounty hunter known as Boba Fett, and we're introduced. I think this movie starts out with C-3PO and R2-D2, right?
Doesn't everybody who's listening to this show know that already?
Yes, everybody does.
It actually starts off with Vader.
Oh, that's right, on the Death Star, huh?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. And he's like, oh, dude, okay,
He
so
announces the Emperor's.
I love
Vader,
that scene. I
like-
love that scene. The whole first 5 minutes.
nothing closer to you.
I love that scene. The whole first 5 minutes is fantastic.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's right. The Star Destroyer comes overhead. The little Tridarian shuttle drops out. It flies over to the Death Star, and Vader walks out. And that, I mean, what a freaking another entrance, right? The ramp come down, and all you see is his boots just coming off that
The
ramp.
man knows how to work a runway.
Dang. And I have to say, he found a better polisher for his suit because the dude is shining.
He's shiny.
He comes off that Tridarian shuttle just looking like a freaking sparkly new pair of boots, man. Like he just got
Somebody
his suit
spit on him and shined it up.
It's not. That wasn't the shuttle Tydirian. That Tydirian.
Not
is
Tridarian. Oh, that's not the name.
the name of the shuttle that they stole.
That's
to
right.
get
What's
down
the
to
name
planet.
of the actual shuttle model number? I can't remember. I'm gonna have to ask this guys over at Scarif because they probably know this stuff. They're smarter than I
Win
am.
a free salty sticker if you can tell us before we can Google it.
But the movie starts off by setting up the new Death Star and the fact that the Emperor is coming.
How did you guys feel about like back then versus now? Because now it's kind of a cliche with the new Death Star. Oh, they built another Death Star, but like back then, was it like a? Are they really reusing that, or was it more of like a? Oh no, that makes sense that they would try and make another one.
I always thought it was kind of lazy.
Yeah.
Right? Like I would have rather they had come up with like a new super weapon. But rewatching it like now as an adult, I'm just like, it's fine.
But it's a super duper Death Star.
A fully functional Death Star.
3 times the size. Yeah,
I've been pulling my hoodie down over my face every night this week and saying Palpatine.
Yeah, she's just sitting next to me like Palpatine. Every time the Emperor comes on, she's just like, yes, good. The hate flow through.
To answer the question, it's a Lambda class T4A shuttle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Google.
Lord Google.
Google.
What did you think about the second Death Star, Vader?
Vader, you get a free salty sticker.
Oh, good.
Did you think it was like a cop out, or were you like, ooh, a new one?
When I was 13, I didn't care. I thought it was pretty cool.
What about now?
It's like, this one's not finished yet. They're going to be able to fly right in the center of it. No problem.
You'd think. What about now, though? Did you like now that
I
it's kind
still
of a
like
cliche,
it.
You still
I still like it. Sure.
Gotta get a pass.
I'm not going to change my mind 40 years later.
But it is funny how these movies all follow the same structure, where they always start off with kind of like a scene that sets up the adventure to come, and then they kind of move to a almost
side
like
quest.
an isolated adventure where it kind of sets the motion for the story to follow. So like in the first movie, you had the droids getting picked up by the Jawas and sold to the Lars homestead, and then you have in the Battle of Hoth in Empire, and then in this one you have the rescue at Jabba's palace, and they all kind of like almost stand on their own as like their own like little mini movies.
Yep.
But they're just kind of like the prelude to what's to come.
Speaking of the rescue of Han Solo, like I can't wait to kind of dig into this, because like in the theatrical version, this was one of my favorite sequences, but in the special edition, the musical number that they did in there just kind of kills it.
Killed it, yeah.
I love the original one so much more than this new one, because it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more subtle, I guess would be the word. It's just not as
in your
obnoxious.
face.
Yeah.
They don't stop the movie to do a musical number.
Yeah. It's kind of just part of the world. It's not. Yeah. God, man, that musical is.
I've never understood why George put that in the movie. Never. It makes no sense.
It was more in tune with his original vision.
Bullshit. He started to get the prequelitis because he had to test his stuff for the
technology.
This was the time frame where he was like replacing guns with walkie-talkies in Spielberg's movies and stuff like that. Like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg literally had no one around to tell them this was a bad idea. So like just left to their own devices, it's kind of like, we talked about how a hero needs struggles to overcome so they can like come out the other side wiser. Spielberg and Lucas both need people to push back against their ideas, because sometimes their ideas are not very good.
Nope.
Well, that's true of anybody. But
yeah.
So let's talk about this rescue mission, since this is the beginning of the film. After we get introduced to Vader and the new Death Star and all that stuff, we catch up with. I know that laugh. I can't help it, man. I got to say the lines.
That's how Kadish was the entire time we were watching.
Dude, I could literally.
I kept thinking he was talking to me, and I'd be like, "What?" And I'd be like, "Oh."
I do the same thing. It drives my wife crazy.
I recorded myself doing it in front of my kid, and my kid just gives me such the dirtiest look ever. He's looking at me like, "You're such a nerd, Dad."
But
ruining this for me.
Once more, this movie starts off with the two lowest characters being the ones who kind of lead the action. Yeah. And we get that funny little like eyeball robot that kind of pops out and says like,
I can't remember how it works, but
he comes back in The Mandalorian. I love seeing that in The Mandalorian.
Yep.
I like the idea, because I know people complain that like there's too many Easter eggs in The Mandalorian. It's kind of just like rehashing the same thing. I'm like, no, it's like a security droid. Like you go and pick up a security.
It's like a Ring doorbell.
Yeah, like a Ring doorbell. Everybody has one. I love that idea.
It's like, what do you want? Although the eyeball
it screams.
Yeah, the eyeball thing apparently is programmed to feel pain.
Yes. He grabs it and pulls it out.
But there's that other droid in Jabba's workshop. They're like basically torturing. They're like soldering his feet.
Well, we're gonna get to the droid.
It's like no.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
There's another droid in Jabba's palace that always freaked the hell out of me as a kid. Is the giant spider one right after they come into the big main vault? And it's just like a walking spider with a light bulb on its butt. I was like, what is that thing? And what does it do?
It's just there to intimidate.
Yeah.
It's an all-terrain walker droid.
All-terrain walker droid. I like that. You should work for the story group at Lucasfilm.
I don't think I could.
Okay, let's real quick. What I wanted to do is kind of break down this rescue mission that Luke, Leia, and Lando come up with because it's bonkers.
Yeah.
So first, we have the droids, R2 and C-3PO, go in there and do what? They offer themselves.
Well, they're to deliver a message
from Luke, right?
and he offers them as a gesture of goodwill to the great and powerful Jabba the Hutt.
Unbeknownst to them.
Yeah, they didn't know.
Well, no, R2 knew.
Oh, yeah.
3PO didn't.
Okay, well, poor 3PO.
Yeah,
He can't keep his mouth shut. So
This is true.
yeah, and he's a coward, so he'd have given up the plan like right away.
Ah, I see. Okay.
But R2, like he needed to be embedded so he could get Luke his lightsaber.
Right.
Okay, so that was step one, was to embed the droids with Jabba.
But if Plan A worked, how would Luke get the droids back?
They knew Plan A was never going to work.
Is that how it's going to go? Like
Yeah,
we
Jabba
know
was
that
never going to give up Han Solo.
we're going to put them in there knowing that he's going to just hoodwink us and
Yeah.
not give us anything.
Yeah.
and don't forget, Lando was already there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lando's been there for a while apparently because he's
And
like
he probably could have gotten the droids out.
he got the job, right? He went for the he went for the interview.
Lando was Plan B.
It's like, hey, can I be a guard for Jabba's palace? And they were like, yeah, sure.
Jabba the Hutt actually has a pretty diverse hiring strategy.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of people of color working for Jabba.
Yeah.
Got green pigs and all kinds of weird
And
things.
if you come in with a bomb, he respects you more.
Yes.
Oh.
That's a boss move too, huh? Leia comes in there, which we don't know it's Leia at the time. Does anybody know her secret
Bounty hunter name?
Yeah, the bounty hunter name, the secret code name?
I used to, but I forgot.
I forgot it too. I'm sure this is
My safe word.
not weird at all.
I can't say it.
Anyway, so she comes in there and she's so she brings Chewbacca.
Yeah.
So she, as a bounty, like, hey, there's a price of what, 35,000 whatever Yahwehs or something.
25.
25. Is it 25 or 35?
It was 25, and then
And she
Jabba
wanted
agreed
50.
to 35.
She wanted 50 and they settled on 35.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
And
they,
I do recommend you take it.
yeah. Because she's holding a thermal detonator.
Boosh.
God, I love this movie.
His name was Boosh.
Boosh?
Yeah.
That's funny.
So bushy.
Boosh. I love your Googling.
Google foo.
This is awesome.
I'm only going to say it if I want you to stop.
They're gonna take our nerd creds for not knowing.
I
something
don't
about
care.
nerd. Anyway,
I've got more nerd cred in my big toe than half the people out there. So
true that, man. True that. So they bring Chewbacca in there as a bounty, and they sell him off for 35,000, whatever credits, whatever they want to call it. So
Starbucks.
Starbucks. So then he gets put into a prison cell, and then that gives Leia free reign in the temple,
She could just go and walk about.
and because she's good, like she's part of the family now. She
She's probably
brought
waiting to
part
get
of the
paid.
crew, man.
the mighty Chewbacca, and so she is meant to go and rescue Han.
Well, she's meant to free Han from the carbonite.
But how are they going to get? If that worked, how are they going to get? Because it seemed like they were surprised that they got caught. So if that worked, how are they going to get Chewbacca out?
Lando.
Lando. Okay,
well, I think
now-
the original plan is for Luke to go in there
and just
and
wreck house.
Jedi mind trick them all and walk out with everybody, but it didn't quite work out that way.
No, it didn't
so.
work. What did he say to him? Your silly Jedi mind
Yeah, that
tricks
doesn't
don't
work on Jabba.
Yeah, because what is it with people on Tatooine who don't get fooled? Is it because of greed? Right? It has something to do with greed.
It has to do with having a strong mind. So, like, only the weak-minded can be Jedi mind tricked.
Oh, that's right. He says that in A New Hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Force can be a powerful.
Here you go.
There go with the lines.
There you go, Mr.
Everything has to do with the lines.
The circle is complete.
When I left you, I was with the learner. Now I am the master. If you set it up, I have to do it. Okay, so this plan does kind of make sense then. Because
Well, yeah.
I've heard multiple people say that the plan to rescue Han Solo was just nonsense.
I kind of go back to Vader's backup plan in, The Empire Strikes Back.
with the Falcon.
Yeah, with the Falcon, where he's like, I know that there are different ways this could work out, so I'm just going to cover all my bases.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I feel like Luke kind of learns that lesson, and so like by the time it comes to rescue Han, he has a plan, and it could work out multiple ways. And in a way, I'm even wondering if he's used the Force to kind of try to see the different outcomes and plan for those. And they never explicitly state this stuff in the movie, but the thing is like all the parts are in place where it could go multiple different ways. Like I don't think he Luke ever planned to be dropped into the Sarlacc pit, or not the Sarlacc pit, the Rancor pit. But once he was there, he kind of had to like improvise and overcome it in order to proceed with his plan. So like there were definitely like kind of like little obstacles thrown in there that they weren't expecting. I don't think Leia planned to be like enslaved to Jabba, like stuff like that. But once
She didn't bring that bikini with her.
Yeah, but once that happened, they kind of just had to roll with it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm liking this conversation because it's making me feel like that whole plan made more sense than like I used to actually think like it was just a bunch of nonsense. But now that we're kind of breaking it down, I feel like I'm a little bit more confident.
How do you feel about Jabba getting choked out? Does he even have a neck?
freaking love it. Yes, he has a neck, and I love the fact. Okay, so this is one of the things that people nowadays
It's just all slug.
kind of complain about Leia being like objectified in this bikini, and I'm like,
Get out of here.
she freaking killed the guy who put her in that bikini with the very chain she was tied up with.
I mean, she might as well have just been screaming, "Fuck the patriarchy." Oh, she did it.
How much more of an F the patriarchy?
This is what I think of your patriarchy.
It chokes the dude out with
I
his own
hate that
chain.
word. I don't even like that dumb word, patriarchy.
What an epic like
The
female
Hudarchy.
Yeah, the Hudarchy.
Yeah.
The penisarchy.
How did you? Okay, actually, before we get to Leia, and I'll talk to you about Leia in a minute, but I wanted to get.
Don't you point at me, sir.
I'm talking about you and Leia because you love Leia, and I know you do because you're a woman.
We both have
Because you
vaginas.
both have vaginas. Anyway, the Rancor pit. I want to get because you saw it in theaters,
Yes.
Vader, and I want to know: did that Rancor just scare the bejesus out of you as a kid? Because it scared the hell out of me.
No, I was 13. I thought it was pretty cool.
Really?
Nothing in this movie scared me, dude.
Okay.
It's not
Also, this is the
it's
guy
not
that wanted to be Darth Vader.
It's not a
this is
scary movie. It's
Yeah, but
a
that Rancor
cool
is
movie.
freaking gnarly, dude.
It was cool.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, how'd they do that? That's what I
It
was
was a
wondering
puppet,
about
right?
that.
It was all puppetry,
Yeah.
Stop motion.
stop motion, and puppetry mixed together. Because it grabs Luke or Mark Hamill like.
Yeah, it's a
the
mixture of different
Yeah.
ways of doing it.
You know my favorite part about the Rancor scene, and Return of the Jedi actually has a lot of moments like this, where there's these little like character moments that are peppered in throughout this movie that just make it so much more interesting to me. Like after the Rancor gets killed, its trainer
Yeah.
and handler comes in and he's like devastated,
Crying 'cause his
that
pet
this
died.
terrible monster has died. And like whenever I watch it, I'm always like, I wonder what his story is. I wonder, like, did he find the Rancor in an egg and like raise it from like a little Rancor into like this big Rancor? Like, what
He's
was that
basically
relationship?
Hagrid.
Yeah, like little things like that just like make this universe like so fascinating. Especially like there was a moment at the end of the movie where the Ewoks are fighting.
You're getting way
the
ahead of
Empire.
us.
I know this is just a quick aside though, and like these two Ewoks are running and there's this explosion and they
yeah.
both hit the ground and then like one of them recovers and he kind of shakes
Nudges
his
the
friend
other one.
to get him back up and his friend's dead and once he realizes it he just kind of like kind of kneels at his side and just it's sad and this is happening in the middle of like the film's climactic battle.
Yeah.
And like you could have easily left that little thing out, just like you could have left out that moment where the Rancor's trainer like mourns over like losing him. But the fact that they decided to keep those little bits in just makes this movie so much more real and so much more emotionally resonant. Even though like these are like throwaway characters, you don't really care about them.
The Ewok scene for sure, like
Yeah.
that definitely hits you, especially as a kid when you're watching your teddy bears like get blown up by the Empire, and you're like, "What the hell?" The one before we get to Jude, there's one more scene. I'm talking about leaving things out and like deleted scenes and whatnot. There was one scene that I do actually wish that they would have left in the movie is when Luke is sensing that Darth Vader is calling to him through the Force as he's creating his new green lightsaber. Because we have no idea at this point that Luke made a new lightsaber because he lost his in Bespin. And we're not expecting like this is a big reveal that Luke has a green lightsaber now. It's like super cool, and I feel like we should have known at least a little bit something. I mean, I guess now I get why they did it because they wanted the big reveal to be during the fight scene. But I'm like, man, that was such a cool scene where he's like in the cave and he's got his hood on and he's like building a new lightsaber.
I've never felt that way about that scene.
No? Oh, I thought it was super cool.
It is a cool scene, but I don't think it needed to be in the movie.
Yeah,
You guys-
because there is that scene later where Vader's examining the lightsaber and he's like, "You built your own lightsaber."
Yeah, I
Impressive.
guess so.
And like so like they even though they don't set it up right at the beginning, eventually they justify why it's there, which is just another sign of good writing.
There's a cool fan theory that I kind of attach myself to when it comes to Luke and his green kyber crystal for his lightsabers. I like the idea that since they're back on Tatooine, he goes back to Obi-Wan's hut and he goes and gets Qui-Gon Jinn's old lightsaber and takes the crystal out of that to make his. And I'm like, that's where he got their green lightsaber. Like that. I mean, to me, I know it's not canon and it's probably just a bunch of bullcrap, but to me, I think that makes the most sense. And I love that theory.
Might be another theory could be that he found a remnant kyber crystal from the destruction of the Death Star. Because once the Death Star, because in Rogue One they set up that it's powered by kyber crystals, and that once it fired off once and fused all those kyber crystals together, like they were all just like green, and so when the Death Star blew up, these fragments all kind of fell on Yavin. And so when Luke went back to Yavin, found enough of these crystals to manufacture his lightsaber.
I like that too.
So he's technically wielding the Death Star.
Kate is just a writer.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. Okay, so Jude, back to you. Leia being the slave of Jabba the Hutt, this ugly green, not green, but ugly slug type creature thing. What did that mean?
Am I personally offended by it?
No, what did that mean to you as like a young woman like growing up? Did you see Leia and be like, yeah, like does that have any impact on you or did you not care about that? Because like as a guy growing up watching Luke Skywalker like kick butt on Tatooine and take out Jabba's like entire force of bounty hunters, like that was a big moment for somebody like me growing up. I was curious. Does it nothing?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Did it make you feel good to be like, yeah?
Did you get tingly in your lady bits?
There's my hero, the type of moment. Did you have any of that?
Well, I mean, I've said before I've never really personally connected with Leia, but seeing her sort of being like having to be the submissive, and she's been this very dominant, headstrong, take charge character. It didn't matter for me that she's a woman or that she has a vagina or whatever. For me, it was about the character being the person who was coming in to rescue someone, and then the next time you see her, she's a slave. So that was more emotional for me rather than just seeing her become his like sex slave or whatever. But also, I thought she looked hot. I don't hate her in the bikini or with the chain around her neck. I thought that was kind of awesome.
Me personally, when I was a kid and watching that scene and seeing Leia in the slave Leia outfit, and being attracted to her, like that made me just ship her and Luke harder. And then later on in the movie, you find out they're related.
What about Han and Leia though?
Well, I always wanted Leia to be with Luke instead of Han because Luke was always the main character, and so growing up I was like Luke and Leia should be. And when I had my toys, they were always boyfriend and girlfriend. So. I was like Dark Helmet. It's like, ooh, playing with my toys.
And the part where she kisses Luke just to spite Han never comes up again. Ever.
That didn't happen.
There was no tongue. It didn't.
We don't talk about that.
In the middle movie, they didn't know that they were related.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just
Neither
saying.
did
No, I'm not saying the characters know. I'm saying that the filmmakers didn't know they were related. That wasn't a decision until they started making Return of the Jedi.
Anyway, Vader, what did you think about the escape from Jabba's palace and the Sarlacc pit? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
You mean the sand vagina?
The giant sand angry vagina. Wasn't this when George Lucas was going through his divorce?
I connected more with that.
I never thought about people's bits and parts ever when I was watching these movies. Not once, ever.
So what did you think about that scene, though? Is there any part of it that you were like, man, I freaking love that part? Yeah.
I thought it was just a fun scene. You know, it was like, they got the sand creature and the tentacles coming out. And,
but special edition.
Yeah, in the special edition, they actually had to add stuff to it to make it look less vagina-y.
That never crossed my mind. Never.
Less labia? Was that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember the story when
ruining this movie for
somebody told me that it was around the time that Lucas was having a hard time with his wife, and I was like, makes sense.
What happened first? Return of the Jedi or Little Shop of Horrors?
That was definitely Little Shop of Horrors because that was a Roger Corman movie originally.
Anyway,
You know, I was more fascinated with all the new characters and stuff in there. You know, every single character in Jabba's palace has a name and an action figure.
Salacious Crumb.
Salacious Crumb.
What a
Yeah,
name!
You know. I think that they named the pet monkey. You know,
and Jabba eating those like little frog things.
Yeah.
Kind of like it reminded me of Dune, where they had like those juice boxes with the little bugs and stuff in them.
One of the
I don't watch these movies and go too deep into social constructs and stupid shit like that. I watch these movies and I enjoy them.
That's
and I
good.
have fun. It's like I don't ship anybody that's not supposed to be shipped. I don't play those fucking games. They piss me off. You're getting me mad now. It's just I don't
Give in to your anger.
You know, it's just like these games, these movies were made
to enjoy. Yeah, I'm with you.
You know,
I kind of dig. I dig a little too deep into things sometimes.
not for people to go, oh, I'm going to ship this person.
Did you guys get
40 years after the movie's made? That's not what this movie's about.
Did you guys get a little teary eyed when Chewie and Han got reunited
Yes.
in that little cell?
I don't know about teary eyed, but I definitely was happy to see them together. I love
their friendship.
I do. I love how Chewie starts petting Han,
And Han's just like, okay, buddy.
okay, but it's okay.
There's never been a character in any movie to me that can show his emotions better than Chewbacca just by some noises that he makes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when Han got frozen into carbonite. You asked me what was an emotional moment in that movie? That was
When Chewbacca
when
screamed.
Chewbacca screamed. You know, it was just like, yeah,
And when Chewie gets Han back and he just grabs him, gives him a big old hug.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Chewie's a hugger.
speaking of communicating emotion, like the end of this movie where you see Vader make the choice to save Luke.
You're way ahead of us, bro. We're at Tatooine, man.
All right. I'll table
Save
that
it.
one.
Save it.
I'll table
I
it.
do have a question,
Go ahead.
especially with Lando. I was wondering if this was intentional or if no one was checking pronunciations during filming, because Lando always calls him
Han.
And
Han and everyone else calls him Han, and it irritates the shit out of me.
Irritates the shit out of Han, too.
Yeah,
And they actually make that a point in the Solo movie.
You never saw Solo, but Donald Glover, who plays the young Lando, intentionally mispronounces, Han's name just to kind of get his goat, I guess, and it just kind of becomes like
A thing.
a thing.
So it's a thing.
Yeah,
I think in reality, it's just how Billy D. Williams
Yeah.
talks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Han.
Han.
There's still
Han,
time
yeah.
to save Han.
All right. So once we get off of Tatooine and our heroes kind of separate again,
Luke goes to Dagobah.
Luke goes to Dagobah because he has a promise to keep,
Well, he wants to finish his training.
which is weird because you feel like he's come pretty far from the last time we saw him. He's got the robotic hand. He's kicking butt on Jabba's.
He's a man of his word.
He made his own lightsaber. Like you feel like he's pretty close.
said,
to
"I
being done."
promise.
He did promise. And then Han.
Don't do that. It bothers me.
It bothers you. I'm gonna ship a couple characters and bother Vader too, and get that side of the table all riled up.
Yeah, we're gonna flip it.
So Han, Chewbacca, and Leia, and the droids too. Except I guess it's just C-3PO
3PO.
go off to meet up with the rebellion. So like the rescue mission has been completed.
I do love when Luke made it a point to be like, let's make sure that we pick up the droids. Don't forget them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't forget the droids.
Yeah, don't forget them.
the feet sticking out.
3PO's feet.
Why didn't R2 just open up his rocket pack and fly around? God.
Well, we didn't know he had that ability.
Yeah, we didn't know. We didn't know he had a fuel pack.
Dave
They just forgot to fill
Dave
his,
Filoni didn't get a hold of him at that point yet.
They just forgot to fill his gas tank. That's why he's been running on empty this entire time.
I do love the relationship between R2 and Luke, though. The whole dog and loyal dog and master relationship. Like
R2 is loyal.
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
for
he
sure.
is. Yes, he is. I love it. I like the part about it, like,
and yet Luke leaves them behind in the sequel trilogy.
whatever, dude. Shut up about the sequel trilogy already. We'll talk about that next week.
I'm not coming next week.
Me neither.
It's gonna be a bad day.
I just don't care about those.
It's gonna be
movies.
Alex and Danny.
Yeah, Danny. And Kate is just narratively ripping
You and
things
Harry,
apart.
we're getting drunk next week.
Oh man! All right, so Kadish, now that we've talked about that, let's set the stage for the actual, like, the main plot of this movie. Set the table for us. What happens in?
So the Emperor arrives, and he has two things on his agenda. The first is to turn Luke Skywalker to the dark side, and the second is to crush the rebellion. And at this point in time, the rebellion has gotten the plans for the new Death Star from like a network of Bothan spies. And they're kind of formulating a plan on how to destroy it and kind of deal like another crippling blow to the Empire. And at the same time, Luke is going to Dagobah to meet up with Yoda to complete his training. And the Emperor is like, well, you know, I know all this is happening. I've foreseen it because he's that powerful. And so he tells Vader that he wants his help in turning young Skywalker to their side, and also that he's going to be luring the rebellion into a trap. And so this movie is basically like these two different stories, which end up becoming like three separate like subplots in the climax of the film, where you have Luke, Vader, and the Emperor all kind of like facing off with one another. You have the Lando-led attack on the Death Star from the space end of things, and then you have the ground assault led by Han Solo and Princess Leia to get rid of the shield generator that's keeping the vulnerable Death Star protected. And what nobody knows is that this new Death Star is actually fully functional. Its super weapon is ready to go, and the Emperor plans to use it once the Rebel fleet arrives to start destroying and dismantling their fleet ship by ship. And at the same time, that strategy is meant to provoke Luke Skywalker towards his path to the dark side. And so basically, the minute the Emperor shows up in this movie, his evil machinations start taking effect right away. And it's kind of interesting when you look at it within the context of how he manipulated things in the prequel trilogy, to see that he's so powerful on the dark side that he can like almost see the future. And so he bases all of his plans off of that. And it's just another example of how formidable the Empire is, where like they're always one step ahead of the good guys. And the good guys come and they like just fall right into his trap. With the famous Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. It's a trap. Yeah. So basically that's what this movie is about. And we get to see the climax of every main character, where Han and Leia kind of, you know, reconcile their relationship. Luke and Vader have their emotional climax, where Vader is redeemed by saving Luke. The Emperor is defeated, and the rebellion overcomes the Empire, and all is right with the galaxy once more. Like it's the perfect fairy tale ending to this.
We sing the Yub Yub song, and everything's good.
Yeah.
Although I will say that this is my least favorite of the original trilogy, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Ewoks. I'm not a fan of the Ewoks.
Really?
Yeah.
See,
That's my favorite.
I never really. I mean, it was.
I just found them too cutesy, and I felt like they always just
Me too.
detracted from like the seriousness of the situation.
I kind of see it, but I'm born and bred on George Lucas's gospel, so I was kind of like growing up, like I kind of knew like George Lucas wanted to show that the Emperor could be taken down by these like lesser forces that weren't as technologically advanced. But
Well, originally he wanted them to be Wookiees, and the budget didn't, you know.
Are you sure about that?
100%. Originally he had them written like it.
I thought it was the person who actually wrote the screenplay did Wookiees, and then he made it Ewoks.
No, well, he turned it into Ewoks after he found out that doing like the Wookiee thing was going to cost too much money. So like he scaled it back because the technology wasn't there to do what he wanted.
How much money could it have been to make a couple of monkey suits and have people run around in them? I don't know if I believe that.
He's not
or
a monkey. Come on.
A Wookiee. Sorry, did I say monkey?
Yes.
I meant Wookiee.
So racist.
Man.
Has nothing to do with what?
You're racist against Wookiees.
Whatever. Anyway,
Wookiees are race.
Jude. What is there something about this movie that just, you say you love the Ewoks. What is it about the Ewoks that you love so much?
So this is the only one that I can remember having seen in my childhood. So it's just one of those nostalgic things that when I see it now, I see it as I did I think I was like 7 or 8 when this came out. So I see it as that child, and it's just so cool. I loved the Ewoks, and I mean, all of my friends did too, and I still feel the same way about it. It still holds that magic for me that it did when I first saw it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is definitely something to be said about those Ewoks, and I don't know if it's because I saw the Return of the Jedi, and then at the same time I watched those Ewok adventure movies that they made after the fact. I love those movies. So like when I saw the Ewoks, it was just kind of like a continuation of what was in Return of the Jedi. I love them. I don't think they were too. I understand when people say they're kind of kiddish. It makes sense. Like
Sure.
I can't really disagree with that, but I don't think it detracts from the movie because they're so much fun to watch. Like they're screwing with the stormtroopers and like stealing their bikes, and they got the idea that they can make these
They're playful.
giant traps that like crush the AT-ST walkers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're surprisingly formidable.
They're very surprisingly fun, and
Their strength is in their numbers.
exactly, which I have no problem with them.
But I mean, they're pretty ruthless too. Like they were going to eat Han.
Okay,
It's like I always think about that scene where they get out of the trap and they're all like got the spears pointed at them on the ground. All of a sudden, you're like, "What's going on here?" All these little teddy bears with spears. I don't know what I would do in that situation, but
Yeah, and if it weren't for 3PO, they'd have been screwed.
yeah, they would have been lunch. I always thought it was like when I was a kid, I never thought about that until way after the fact. Somebody was like, "Dude, the Ewoks are like gonna eat people, right?"
Well,
like,
they're not
all those
people.
all those dead stormtroopers are like
they're
dinner.
They're
Yeah.
just
It's like if we
banging
were
on
if we were
helmets at the
fighting with
end.
a herd of cattle, we're gonna eat them after.
They're not sentient.
So the stormtroopers don't count. I never really thought about
That's
it when I was
me.
watching the movie, and I really wonder if it was something that they thought through when they were making the movie. Of like, hey guys, if we're having these Ewoks basically like essentially eat the stormtroopers, like is that something that went through their head when they were writing
We're
this?
going there, guys. Is everyone cool with
Is
it?
everything okay?
All right.
We're gonna have these guys like just devour the leftover stormtroopers and play bongos on their skulls.
Great.
They got to get their drums somewhere.
Somewhere. Gotta get their war drums.
And they sold a lot of Ewok toys too. So
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, teddy bears, Ewoks. They're still selling Ewok toys. Warwick Davis is out there. He was Wicket. The heart of the Ewok story is Wicket.
Yeah, he was the one who found Princess Leia.
Found Princess, which is that was a cool scene too. I mean, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but like once Leia, her and Luke go off on this little adventure and taking down these stormtroopers so they don't get caught on Endor. And
I hate to keep bringing this up, but the Kurosawa film, Hidden Fortress, that speeder scene.
you don't hate to keep. Go ahead and bring it up.
He hasn't mentioned
I love to
Hollywood
bring
once.
this up. The speeder bike scene through the forest of Endor, like that was actually directly inspired by a scene in the Hidden Fortress where
It was a horse chase, right?
it was a horse chase by the general character who protects the princess, and he's trying to race down these guys before they can alert the rival army about their presence. And so it's kind of funny if you look at all three of the original trilogy films, like there's little bits and pieces of the Hidden Fortress kind of peppered in throughout all three of them.
Yeah. You know how they made that shot going through the redwood forest like that? I always thought this was really cool. I always thought it was really cool how they made that shot with the speeder bikes through the redwood forest. Is they took a camera and just walked the trail in the redwood forest at like super slow
I got a
road.
story about that.
Do you really? Oh, I can't wait to hear it when you get your voice back together.
I'm good. I'm good. So the speeder bikes,
Yeah.
I have no idea if this is true or not. But when I was in junior high school, when they were making this movie, this was before the movie came out, okay? A friend of mine in junior high, in his locker, had a picture, a Polaroid of two guys in stormtrooper suits next to a speeder bike. And I'm like, what is that? Oh, this is from the new Star Wars movie they're making. My uncle is one of the stormtroopers in it.
What?
So he had this picture, and I always thought that was the coolest thing. You know, this kid, I'm not going to say his name because he's a dick, but he grew up bad. But I always thought that was the coolest thing that I knew a guy whose uncle was in
Yeah.
Star Wars. You know, it was just kind of cool.
That is pretty cool. Wish I knew somebody was in Star
Yeah.
Wars.
That guy sucked, but his uncle's probably cool.
That was dope.
Yeah.
I know that the special effects in Return of the Jedi were like, this monumental feat that, ILM basically had to achieve. And part of that was the speeder bike scene. But one of my favorite things, because, when I first got into filmmaking, I wanted to be a special effects artist. So I was like studying ILM and all these, stories about how they did these effects. And the final like space battle in this movie had so many moving parts. And this was like, back when they had to like shoot all these things individually and composite them in together. And it was way more complicated than it is now, where you just have computers do everything. But there were so many different ships and moving parts that the special effects guys, I think John Dykstra in particular, at one point, like he needed like stuff just to fill the frame. So he took off his shoe and put it, like in one of the space scenes as like one of the ships. And
Really?
So, yeah. And so
Because
like,
I know there's a potato in the asteroid field.
but there's a scene in that final space battle where there's just this like upside down shoe floating in the background. Looks like a spaceship.
That's cool.
And that was just because the special effects guys like ran out of ships to use, like ran out of models that they could actually use to put in there.
The battle in Return of the Jedi and the space battle with the X-Wing. I mean, that's got to be one of the best freaking space battles
That was
I've
intense.
ever seen. That was incredible.
Hundreds. Was
Yeah.
there hundreds?
Oh, easily. Yeah.
TIE fighters in and out.
Yeah, I remember.
It's
There's
like-
too many of them, and the Falcon goes in between like a whole fleet of Star Destroyers. They got the TIE and what was it called?
TIE interceptors.
In interceptors, they got the regular TIE fighters. There's all kinds.
I
of
think the
different
only
stuff
thing
going
that comes close is the final act of Rogue One.
Yeah, but I mean, there's not even. I don't know if there's the same. There's the sheer mass of ships in the battle itself. Like the battle in Return of the Jedi is just epic proportions. It's huge.
Yep.
It's the culmination of everything we've been watching for the last 3 movies, and it's all coming to this one peak moment. You have the entire Rebel fleet. You have was it the entire Imperial fleet too as well?
I don't know if it was the entire Imperial.
A good portion of it.
It was like the majority of it.
Yeah.
Because they were there to protect the Emperor.
Yeah, it was just man. I have shots in my head that I can't not ever get out. Is like the A-wing got shot and was like flipping and doing little tumbles and stuff like that. And
I remember when
intensify forward firepower. It just blows up inside there.
I remember when they showed the Executor.
Oh
Vader's
yeah.
big flagship. It's
Super
like
Star
16
Destroyer.
miles long or whatever. It was like, I thought that was the coolest ship ever. And then they plow it into the Death Star. And I'm like, God.
And all it took was
Bless
like
it.
they just destroyed the two little bulbs on
Yeah,
the top,
yeah.
and that was all it was. It was like, all right, this ship's done. The whole thing's going down.
Well, they kamikaze the bridge.
Yeah. It was pretty crazy. I mean, that whole battle is just so much fun to watch. And I think one of my favorite parts of that is watching Wedge and Lando navigate the interior of the Death Star, and just all the piping and like the industrial complex of the whole thing, and having to weave in and out of it. It's incredible. And it was at such high speeds.
And when you're watching it, you don't even realize that the amount of work that went into like that stuff with the technology of that time. Like we're sitting here today, where you can basically build all that stuff in the computer and get any angle you want at any speed. Like back then, each one of those things was like its own separate like thing that had to be shot and put together and made to like look cohesive, as part of the film. Some of the special effects don't really hold up all that well, but considering what they had to work with, like it's very impressive.
Yeah. And they introduced my favorite type of starfighter in Star Wars
B-wing?
in this movie is the B-wing. That friggin' thing is dope. It like unfolds and it's got like the little pod thing that turns and the wings open up. I'm like, man, that is the coolest friggin' ship. It's even cooler than the X-wing. I'm sorry, I said it. It's cooler than the X-wing.
My favorite Star Wars ship is the one that bombs at the bottom.
With the magnetic bombs.
They just kind of sit there and
Where you have to be directly overhead of your
wrong movie. I'm sorry.
Jude, what are your feelings towards this final battle and the space thing? Do you have any fond memories of that scene or anything like that stood out to you?
No, not really. I think that you guys all feel similarly with each other about which scenes you love, and I'm just like, it's not for me. I love the Ewoks, and I love the love story.
Jude was the little girl.
I hate to be this woman
Jude
with
was the
the
little
raging
sister.
lady bits.
Own it. Own it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I liked the cutesy stuff. I was an 8-year-old little girl when I saw this movie for the first time, and I think that might have been the last time I saw it before we watched it for this.
You haven't watched it since then?
I don't think so.
Holy cow.
Yeah, so that's my history with this movie, is just like watching it when I was a little girl, and I was just like, oh, the Ewoks, they're so cute. What are you making hand gestures at me for?
Jude was the little girl that they had to make teddy bears for to put in Star Wars.
They made it for the kids. All kids.
Also, they gave a lot of little people jobs that
He
year.
did.
They
Yeah,
did.
there's a lot of. I need more to drink. A lot of midgets getting jobs.
Little
yeah.
people.
Little people.
You know what is
Carnies.
really
I don't know if I can leave this.
small hands smell like cabbage?
Easily tossed.
Hey, if Austin Powers can do it, we can too, right?
So,
Oh, good Lord.
You know, one of the interesting things about Return of the Jedi is it's one of the first movies that I can think of that actually used this like parallel storytelling technique where the climax of this movie is 3 different stories are going on at the same time. And it's very hard to pull that off well. And I feel like this movie did that really well. And it was also probably one of the first to actually like do that, at least like with 3 movies. I think it had been done with like 2 different storylines before, but 3 different storylines were being told here. There was, Vader versus Luke. There was the space battle, and there was the ground battle. And, it's funny because George Lucas employed this same technique with the end of The Phantom Menace, where he had 3 different stories kind of like climaxing at the same time. And it pretty much parallels what happened in Return of the Jedi. But structurally, it's a very interesting like storytelling technique, and you can tell Lucas's fingerprints were kind of all over that. Even though Lawrence Kasdan, I think, helped write this script as well.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of fleshed everything out because everything kind of ended at different points in the Phantom Menace. Like the lightsaber battle with Maul ended at a different point than this.
Well, same thing with this, but they were all kind of going concurrently.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think it's cool that you connect to Jude. Sorry, I should say that so people that aren't watching, Jude connects with the love story. You're talking about Han and Leia,
Yeah.
and their whole thing, like.
Yeah, and I love the point where she reveals to Han Solo that he's her brother, and he was all jealous, and he was like, "I'll stand aside," and I just liked that interaction, that dynamic between him and his. I mean, they were pals, they were brothers, they were family.
Yeah,
and he was like, "Well, if you love Luke, I'll put my feelings aside and I will stand aside." And he wasn't happy about it. He was pretty salty about it.
He's got Chewie.
But yeah. Chewie will keep me warm at night. And and it was just like the reveal that, no, I love him because he's my brother and you're my man. I mean, sorry, but not sorry. I love that.
that's awesome. That's good.
I don't remember it that way.
You don't remember it that way? It's because you were a boy and you were like, "Look, lightsabers."
It's like, ew,
They kissed.
they're gonna kiss. Gross.
I think the biggest, besides the space battle, which obviously I just geek out about every time, but I think the real thing that kind of brought this movie home for me is the battle between Vader and Luke.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, man, how powerful was that? Like he walks
Like when that movie, when the music swells and they're like fighting each other.
Oh my goodness, it's insane. But even before that, like when Luke goes in there and he's just like a cocky little shit, and he's like, "Your overconfidence is your weakness. Your friends and your faith is yours." Or your faith in your friends. I said it wrong. God damn it. I love that interaction between them where Palpatine's just sitting there just taunting Luke, trying to get him to move. Make a move, kid. I know you want this lightsaber. Just do it. Do it.
Do it.
But what's interesting about that scene is that so the entire time Luke is trying to walk this fine line between resisting, trying to like actually kill Vader, but at the same time like facing off with him. And Yoda always said like your final challenge is going to be
To confront Vader.
confronting Vader, and the Emperor's like whole plan. It seems like the minute Luke gives into his anger is the minute he's lost basically. And if you look at the fight, Luke is playing things like super cool up to the point where Vader targets Leia. Like he discovers Leia's his sister, and that he's going to hurt her, or he's like, I can corrupt her after I kill you.
Yeah.
And Luke's Achilles heel has always been his loyalty and love for his friends and family. And that moment is when Luke loses it, because he's like, okay, this isn't about me anymore. I have to protect my sister. And that's when he goes after Vader, and that's when he defeats Vader. And in that moment, where, his passion for his family kind of overcomes his Jedi calmness, that's when the Emperor feels like he's won. And, like Vader's at his mercy. He's cut off, Luke's cut off Vader's hand, and the Emperor's coming down like, good.
Yeah.
And Luke realizes, I lost my hand just like my father. And in that moment, Luke realizes that in the very first movie, he set out what his character's journey was going to be. He said, I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. And in that moment, when he realizes that, he just cut off the hand of his dad and he lost his hand, he realizes, I'm just like my father right now, and I have to make the same decision my father made. And he throws away his lightsaber, and he's like, and he stands up to the Emperor and he says, I reject you, and I am now a Jedi just like my father before me. And that's the culmination of his character arc.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's so poetic and beautiful and so well done. And that's just a moment where like it gets me right in the chest, where I'm just like, oh God,
Yeah,
that's
it's
so
so
good.
And there's a cool little callback, and I have to bring some attention to the prequels. I know we kind of talked crap about them in the last podcast, but there's a moment where that very same thing happens to Anakin when he's going up against Dooku in Revenge of the Sith, and he takes on the guy who had cut off his arm, and he's going up against him, and he gets the better of him, and then instead of throwing down his saber like Luke does, he cuts Dooku's head off, and that was the moment where he kind of like set his path moving forward.
Yep.
So like the thing that when I argue with people about Luke and his character, especially now that the sequels have come out, is like Luke was always the one who was meant to be better than everybody else. He was better. He made better decisions than his father did. He made better decisions than Yoda and Obi-Wan did. And that's what set him apart. And that's what was the only dividing factor between who he was and his father, and how he got his father to turn back to the light, was because he was so pure and so believing in his father's redemption.
Yeah.
And Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi had both given up on Vader at this point. They were like, this is when the line comes in. He's more machine rather than man, twisted and evil. You must confront Vader. I can't kill my own father. I can't bring myself to do that. And he's like, well, then the Emperor's already won. Like Obi-Wan didn't see any other way out of this, but Luke did. And that's what sets him apart from all the other Jedi. And I'm like, why don't people understand this?
And I also feel like this is the moment when Luke says to the Emperor, like, I am just like my father. I feel like there was a power in this moment, and this is really what made Vader turn against the Emperor. I don't feel like it was really the moment of watching the Emperor torture his son. I feel like it was the moment where his son said, I'm just like you.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing parts about this scene where, Vader saves Luke and kills the Emperor is that I guess they've kind of done this in The Mandalorian a little bit, but the amount of emotion that you're getting from Vader, even though his face is just a static mask, like the way they use the camera and the head movements of the actor and stuff like that, like you see him make that decision to save Luke at the expense of his own life and to redeem himself, even though he has no facial expression whatsoever. And it's such a powerful moment. And one of the things that I really hated about rewatching it with the special edition is in the original theatrical version, Vader is silent when he makes this decision. He just goes, picks up the Emperor, lifts him up and throws him over the thing. But in the special edition, he says, no.
What?
Yeah. And it's a callback to the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Not
where he
on
says
my
no.
DVD, he doesn't.
Yeah.
On the Disney Plus version,
# not my Star Wars.
he says no, like he does in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
I got to go watch that again now. I'm blanking. But, yeah,
I watched it last night, and when that happened, I was like, "You got to be kidding me!"
No, I have the DVDs from the '90s. Like those are my Star Wars movies. I didn't watch these on Disney Plus. He says no.
In the special edition, he does.
You just ruined it.
That kind of ruins that whole moment.
Yeah, it really undercuts it.
Oh.
Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
God damn it, George.
But it is a great emotional climax
Okay, yeah.
for that relationship.
All right.
I mean, I guess.
Anyway, how good is Ian McDermott in this friggin' movie? I mean, he plays
Ian
that.
McDiarmid.
McDermott?
McDiarmid.
There is a D at the end of the name. McDonald's.
Say it
Ian
right.
McDonald's. Ian McDermott.
Palpatine.
Yeah, something
Dark side.
dark side.
Give in to your
He gets that into every podcast at least once.
It's my favorite voice to do.
My favorite character to play when Kadish and I are alone.
Yeah, she role plays Palpatine.
If my wife and I ever get into an argument, I'm always like, I can feel your anger.
Oh, I bet that pisses her off.
She does. It does so bad. It's so funny though. All right. So what else do we have to talk about? Return of the Jedi. I can't praise the epic conclusion enough as far as like when it comes to Vader and Luke. But there's a couple of things we kind of skipped over a little bit. Is how did you guys feel about Yoda and his death sequence and that kind of reveal of like, there is another Skywalker, like his final words to that. Like Vader, you watched it in theaters. Do you remember anything like, what is he talking about? Like, who's the other Skywalker?
Yeah, that's vaguely.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah. It's like, oh, there is another. Okay, oh, whatever. There's another. We figure it out, so.
I always get choked up in that scene, though, because, like, Luke's just like, Master Yoda, you can't die. And he's like, strong in the Force am I, but not that strong. And it's just, I'm just like, oh.
Palpatine was that strong, though.
Yeah, so can we talk about, like, so we all know Palpatine comes back.
This is going to be like
9.
the 4-hour podcast.
It's
the original trilogy.
It's at about 3 hours now, I think.
So we all know Palpatine comes back in episode 9.
Yeah.
And when Vader kills him, he throws him over the side.
Vader kills him?
Yeah, spoiler alert. So he throws Palpatine down that pit, and we never see Palpatine like die. We just kind of see this explosion type thing.
Blue light explosion.
Yeah. And, there's this theory that, Palpatine, having learned the ways of immortality from Darth Plagueis, basically he erupted into dark force energy before he died and was somehow able to reform despite the Death Star blowing up. And the Palpatine that we see in episode 9 is that reformed, like Palpatine, who's all misshapen because, he didn't reform at 100%. What do you guys think of that theory?
None of this makes any freaking sense.
I've never had a problem with that dark energy theory. I always kind of thought something along those lines could happen. Like I remember I read what was that comic book series that came out and had Sidious clones and stuff in it. It kind of touched on that.
Well, Shadow of the Empire.
Shadow of the Empire. Yeah, I haven't read it in a long time, but that whole concept of the dark energy of making him that all this evil force flowing out and everything, that I always kind of thought that's what that was to begin with. So
yeah, because like the whole concept of the Jedi who become one with the Force, that's how they achieve immortality. But the dark side doesn't go back to the source of the Force. Like they continue to kind of like stay separate from the core of the Force, and so like they're able to like reform. Yeah. Based off of the strength of their will or hatred or something like that. So I just find that dichotomy interesting, but this is pure headcanon at this point, sure. Like trying to justify this.
Yeah. I don't like it, man. I like the idea that Palpatine died at the end of Return.
I always kind of like the idea of Palpatine having a secret base somewhere with a bunch of different clones of himself in it. So if he died, he could just transfer his essence into another one. All this hocus pocus bullshit that they did in the last movie, they did it wrong.
Jars of Snoke.
Jars of Snoke.
Yeah, it's stupid. But
I don't know.
But
man.
yeah,
I mean, I get it because I didn't mind it when I saw those comics and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, okay, it kind of makes sense if they want to bring the Emperor back. That's how they're going to do it.
I like that. If the Jedi can come back and live forever as Force goes, I don't have any issues with Sith being able to do something similar. I like the whole concept in the comics of them being able to put their essence in like a container, like a mask
Oh yeah,
or something like
cool.
that.
Yeah,
that's a
cool.
really cool story. You know, the whole what are the triangle things?
Wayfinders.
The holocrons. You know, putting their essence in a holocron so they can teach their pupils later on with that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's all cool.
It's really too bad Star Wars doesn't have any source material to pull from.
I know. It's crazy.
Gosh, man, it's almost like
I watched that video today of Kathleen Kennedy. Well, you know, we don't have any like novels or comic books or anything to pull on from to make these our new videos, and we're just like,
that's all you did.
what? Stupid bitch. I don't know.
Dang. All right. Any closing thoughts on Return of the Jedi?
Matt Vader's not wrong.
No, I can't argue with him. We've gone far too long on this, but is there any closing thoughts on Return of the Jedi?
I think
favorite moments. What's your favorite moment?
Definitely the final face-off with Vader, where Luke says, "You know, I'm a Jedi like my father before me." Like that culmination of Luke's arc is just, wow, it's perfect.
Jude, what's your favorite moment in this movie?
I like this whole movie, start to finish.
Oh wow.
But I don't know that it's necessarily my favorite, but I think something that stands out for me is the scene where Luke turns himself in, and he has that. It's not a confrontation, but it's just a conversation with Vader.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
Yeah.
That is
It's a great scene.
It's the only time that Luke and Vader are together when they're not fighting.
Yeah, and they just kind of like check each other to see where each other stands, and it's just like, okay,
So you've accepted,
all right.
You've accepted
So let's
the
go on
truth.
from here. Yeah. Yeah.
I've accepted the truth that you were once Anakin.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a
I'm
real
doing it.
We know you know those lines.
Doing it.
it's a real prodigal son moment, and it's the only it's the first and only scene we get to see of like the possible relationship that these two characters have outside of the antagonistic one.
Vader gets shook when he's like, that name no longer has any meaning. Like he's like, whoa, how do you know?
Yeah.
Who do you know that is? Who told you that was my name?
Like his turn back to the light side really starts in that scene.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a moment where he's like, wow, that's my kid. That's weird. And he's always got that connection to Padme, and I think that's
Yeah, we have the that's my man moment, and we have the that's my boy moment.
that's my son. Go, son.
Also, like you know, when Luke has Vader at his mercy, and the Emperor's like, kill him and join and take your place at my side. And then, like when he doesn't kill him, if I was Vader, I'd have killed Palpatine anyway.
Right.
Absolutely.
It'd be like, dude,
Bro.
you just wanted to kill me.
Vader, what's your favorite part of this movie?
Probably the final confrontation
Yeah.
at the end. Yeah.
It's hard to
I mean,
say
that's the
anything
culmination of the whole trilogy, really.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think besides the space battle, which I think is just absolutely
dope.
epic, it's fantastic. It has to be the fight between Luke and Vader, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you know, the only reason why Luke won that battle was because he had the high ground consistently.
That's true.
He consistently had the high ground. He was on top of the stairs for half of it, and then he was jumped up on the catwalk, and then the rest of it.
And Vader's always like, Obi-Wan taught you well.
yeah.
You know, if Vader had been burning up into a heap of fire, Luke wouldn't have left him there like that. Jerk.
No, because Luke is a better Jedi than Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I believe that to my core.
That scene's always pissed me off. Why don't you just leave him there? What a jerk, man! It's just,
Well, he learned that from Qui-Gon.
I know we're supposed to
Ridiculous.
we're supposed to stop and talk about something else now, but seriously, like Obi-Wan kind of comes off as a dick in this movie because he's like,
From a certain point of view.
you told me that Vader destroyed and murdered my father. And he's like, well,
why didn't you leave him a charred, burned husk on the side of the lava river?
technically I told you the truth, but not really.
Semantics.
You're lucky you're not flesh and blood because
That was
I'd slice you open.
That was Kasdan trying to do some narrative backflips, trying to settle that plot hole.
Also, Luke is a better Jedi because, like, Vader had been trained by Obi, but Luke had been sort of trained a little bit by Obi-Wan Kenobi, but also by Vader too, or not by Yoda also. So I think there's a huge difference in the kind of Jedi that is created by the training of Obi-Wan versus the training of Yoda.
Yeah.
Well, I also think like in the Old Republic era, like Jedi they were so divorced of their emotions that they lost sight of, you know, things like compassion
Exactly.
and you know, this idea of fairness and and being loyal to your friends and believing in something like, greater than yourself.
Exactly, because in like a prequel era training sequence with Yoda and some young Padawan learner, if he would have say, no, you're going to stay here and train on Dagobah, don't go after your friends. Like in the prequel era, the apprentice probably would have been like, okay, I got to do what my master says, as opposed to Luke, who grew up with those emotions and has a strong attachment to his family. He's like, no, I'm going to go. I'm going to do this because this is the right thing to do. And I do think that Luke is the best Jedi in all of these movies.
Until episode 8.
Shut the up.
On that note,
I would like to thank all of our listeners for listening to the Salty Nerd Podcast. We really do appreciate it. You guys are helping us grow this show. If you guys would like to support us, please go to saltynerdpodcast.com. It will take you directly to iTunes if you use Apple, or it will also take you directly to Google Play if you are an Android user. And be sure to help us out on our ultimate goal of getting 50,000 followers. What is that? 50,000 subscribers by tweeting, Instagramming, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. We're on everything. Just go talk to us. Help us grow our channel. We're only going to get better. We're only going to have cooler, more fun content talking about movies and TV shows, and we need your help to do it. So go to saltynerdpodcast.com, saltynerd.com if you want to check out all of our stuff and our website. And thanks very much, guys. We really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And signing off, Matthew Kadish, where can they find you on the socials?
At Matthew Kadish, Kadish, and kadishbooks.com. And may the force be with you.
Jude, where can they find you?
At I am the Palpatine.
Palpatine.
At I am Juju on Instagram and Twitter.
Right on. And you got book reviews? Do you have another one coming out? I knew you just did Handmaid's
Every
Tale,
Friday.
right?
Yeah.
Every Friday.
Every Friday on YouTube.
SaltyNerdVideo.com.
All good. You had to finish it for Matthew Vader. Matt Vader 74. Where can they find you?
well, you just said it.
I did, didn't I?
At Matt Vader 74.
We've been talking for too long. I'm starting to lose it a little bit.
I really gotta go to the bathroom.
All right, guys. Have a great night, and may the force be with you. Hey everybody, this is Salty from the Salty Nerd Podcast, here to remind you that we are a member of the Red 5 Network. If you would like to support other podcasts just like this one, you can go to red5network.com. Red 5, all wings report in.